dapat po munang alamin or matukoy ang pangunahing problema ng bansa upang mapagtuunan ng pansin at mabigyan ng solusyon.
We should have specific goals, do research, and make a policy that is fair for everyone.
Walang problema sa pulisiya. Iayos lang ang pagpapatupad.
Bago patubas ang batas, pag-aralan muna gusto ng government.
Two things, clarity and execution. Both, you need the communication and monitoring. As simple as that.
Mandato ng Philippine Institute for Development Studies o PIDS na gumawa ng mga pag-aaral at pananaliksik ng mga polisiya at programa ng pamahalaan at magbigay ng rekomendasyon sa mga mambabatas sa pagbabalangkas ng mga polisiyang makakatulong sa ating bansa. Sinusulong ng aming ahensya ang evidence-based policy making upang bigyan diin ang kahalagahan ng polisiya na batay sa datos at policy research na sumusuri sa tunay na kalagayan ng ating mga komunidad. Napakahalaga ng policy research, lalo na sa mga panahong dumadaan sa krisis ang ating bansa.
Kapag pulisiya ay pinag-aralan, susulong ang bayan!
Would you get on a rocket ship that hadn't been tested, didn't know how high it was flying, or even how fast it should be going? Well, that's pretty much what many global development interventions are doing. They might know the number of people and the final destination they want to reach, but they just didn't have the time to test whether the rocket ship would work before they had to launch it for its main trip. And addressing global poverty is harder than sending a rocket to the moon. That's where IPA's Right Fit Evidence Unit comes in. We help our partners figure out the most important questions to ask, how to answer them, and help them test and refine their programs. You can think of us as helping our partners design and implement test flights and ways to measure success, all so they can build a better rocket or to adapt their rocket to a new or bigger journey. We have helped many of the world's most impactful implementers, funders, and government agencies deepen their impact by finding the right fit with their data and evidence. For example, a large NGO impacting millions of people worldwide came to us with a simple question: how can we make better use of the vast amounts of data we collect? Among other issues, we found that staff often didn't fully believe what the data they collected said. We then provided help in designing and rolling out practices on high-quality data collection and how to use it throughout the organization for more impact. That example was from an implementing organization, but we often work with foundations and governments as well. For example, we helped one foundation balance its own youth employment learning goals with those of grantees. We supported an education-focused foundation in designing a program cycle that would catalyze innovation and generate proven solutions. And we helped yet another integrate existing evidence in its initiatives to unlock measurable impact gains. With offices in 20 countries, there are countless ways we can help you. Please contact us if you want to help us transform how the sector uses data, or if you want to harness the power of data and evidence and get your impact to the next level. Come join us.
In need of references for your research? Do you want a digital library that you can access for free anytime and anywhere? You don't have to look far. SERPI is here for you. SERPI is an online database of socioeconomic materials produced by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, government agencies, research and academic institutions, and international organizations based in the Philippines. It is the country's first online repository of socioeconomic information, created for policymakers and development practitioners, researchers, educators, and students. To access SERPI, just visit the PIDS website and click the SERPI widget under the Databases tab, or type serp-p.pids.gov.ph. SERPI has a wide variety of materials such as journal articles, books, research papers, working papers, policy notes, audiovisual materials, and more. As of 2022, SERPI has more than 60 partner institutions contributing knowledge resources to the database. SERPI provides a comprehensive coverage of references encompassing 22 research themes: labor and education, gender and development, poverty, technology and innovation, trade and industry, and many more. On the enhanced website of SERPI, you can filter your research by keyword or author, publication type, research theme, or year published, all at the same time. SERPI has more than 7,000 publications and audiovisual materials that you can access and download for free. What are you waiting for? Visit SERPI now. Socioeconomic research portal for the Philippines, innovating knowledge exchange and policy research.
Enrolled children receive a simple SMS each week with practice math problems, followed by a tutoring phone call that is tailored to their specific learning needs. Tutors target learning on a week-to-week basis using a simple checkpoint or problem of the day, delivered at the end of each tutoring phone call. How a student responds to this checkpoint, right or wrong, informs tutors on whether they should proceed to another topic or repeat a lesson in the following week.
Hello? Hello? Hi, Tuto.
Hi. The question says, how much money did she spend altogether?
125. A carrot is 52 centimeters long.
Whereas how many 5 centimeter slices can it be cut into?
Phone-based tutoring is very flexible. When parents avail their phones for children to learn on, it is a direct indication of their support.
With a basic handset, we can teach the children the basic math skills. So this program helped us to reach out to more students.
Wherein I have learned po a new way of teaching po the student despite po ng may pandemya po tayo ngayon.
Doon mo nakikita na hindi mo lang pala natuturuan yung mga bata, tuturuan mo din yung sarili mo kung paano ba maging flexible.
Boost po yung kanilang confidence kahit through mobile teaching lang po.
So what is PIDS? For over 40 years, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or PIDS, has been the country's foremost socio-economic think tank. It conducts rigorous and objective policy research and analyses that help the government in crafting relevant policies, plans, and programs in support of the country's long-term vision and development goals. PIDS pursues its mandate through 3 basic programs: research, dissemination, and outreach. Through its research program, PIDS identifies and prioritizes studies, develops proposals, and conducts research on priority areas. The results of these studies are then disseminated through different platforms, publications, online resources, PIDS Corner, seminars, and the Development Policy Research Month, or DPRM, held every September. To shed light on key policy issues, the advice and expertise of the Institute's research fellows are also sought by policymakers, government agencies, private sector, and civil society. Since 1977, PIDS has completed numerous policy studies on a wide range of development topics. This brand of service has then translated to policies and programs that have improved the lives of every Filipino. Philippine Institute for Development Studies, service through policy research.
Welcome to the PIDS webinar series. Before we start our virtual event, we have some reminders. For attendees, your microphone is automatically muted upon entry. If you wish to join the discussion, click the Q&A icon, type your question, and click send. For Facebook viewers, you may send your question using the comment section. Remember to keep your questions concise and direct to the point. We will screen all questions to ensure that they are relevant to the webinar topic and the presentation. The moderator will read the questions during the open forum and cover as many as possible depending on the available time. This webinar is being recorded and live streamed on the PIDS and CERPI Facebook pages. The recording will also be made publicly available on the PIDS YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your active participation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar with the theme Transforming Education in the Philippines, Insights and Innovations. I am Cruz from the Innovations for Poverty Action, and I will be your host and moderator for today's event. This public webinar is co-hosted by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies and the Innovations for Poverty Action. IPA and PIDS have recently formed a strategic partnership to collaborate in research and dissemination to promote evidence-based policymaking. Today, we'll be hearing two studies featuring the topic of education, a quite complex topic that requires innovative solutions that are responsive to the needs of Filipino learners. When we talk about education in the Philippines, we would always ask the question, what can we do to address the learning challenges in the basic education sector? We will try to seek some answers in today's webinar. We will hear from our speakers who will be sharing their insights from their studies and learn about potential areas and innovative programs to help improve the quality of Philippine basic education. To formally open our event and to shed more light on today's topic, please join me in welcoming Dr. Marife Ballesteros, Vice President of the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, for her opening message.
Thank you, Isha. So on behalf of the PIDS President, Dr. Aniceto Orbeta Jr., who is one of the speakers in today's event, I welcome you all to this webinar titled Transforming Education in the Philippines, Insights and Innovations. As mentioned by our moderator, this is co-organized by PIDS and the Innovations for Poverty Action, or IPA. Before we start, I would like to greet the esteemed officials present today. From the House of Representatives, Director Dominador Gamboa, Philippine Economic Zone Authority or PEZA, Zone Manager Earl Marie Baisa, Rizal Technological University Vice President for Research, Innovation and Extension Services, Julius Meneses, Palawan State University Vice President for Student Affairs and Services, Carlos Alfonso Salvador, Ateneo de Manila University Assistant Vice President for Graduate Education, Ann Caldelaria, Philippine Science High School Directors Romeo Ongpoy and Ramil Sanchez, Miriam College Center for Strategic Research Executive Director Carmen Peñalosa, and from a friend and former colleague, Consul General Maria Lourdes Salcedo of the Philippine Consulate General in Melbourne. I would also like to greet the participants from the Department of Education and the Commission of Higher Education and various schools and universities who joined us today. I was listening to President Bongbong Marcos Sona last Monday, and he did mention about horror stories in the Philippine education sector. He particularly referred to issue on the textbook problem, but we all know that this is just one of the challenging issues faced by the education sector. I think we can look forward to the discussion in today's webinar as we get to hear the true state of the Philippine basic education sector from empirical works of experts, and more importantly, their recommendations and actionable solutions to the problems. The COVID-19 pandemic has indeed exacerbated the existing problems in Philippine education, as shown in the inability of the sector to cope with the challenges arising from school closures, the shift to online learning, and disruptions to conventional teaching methods. The UNICEF reported that around 27 million Filipino students were impacted by school closures during the pandemic. The sudden transition to distance learning posed numerous challenges, particularly to students in vulnerable communities with limited access to technology and the internet. The World Bank's 2021 policy note enumerated the challenges in distance learning, such as limited access to gadgets and internet, poor quality materials, and scarcity of resources in local languages. It was said that 8 in 10 households with enrolled children primarily use paper-based modules for distance learning, which can be effective with proper support, but may be challenging without teacher supervision or peer and household assistance. Additionally, the 2022 PIDS discussion paper titled Philippine Education, Situational Challenges and Ways Forward, authored by Dr. Aniceto Orbeta Jr. and PIDS Research Fellow Dr. Vicente Paqueo, highlighted the challenge of overall quality in the education system, despite producing high-quality graduates who have successfully entered global labor markets. The 2 studies that will be presented in today's webinar aims to explore ways to enhance education delivery when faced with crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. The first study, Basic Education During the COVID-19 Pandemic, What the Enrollment by Learning Modality and Household Characteristics Tells Us, is another paper authored by Dr. Orbeta, which examined the education delivery in the Philippines and proposes intervention to address learning disparities. This paper is actually part of the PIDS book, The Philippines Response to COVID-19 Pandemic, Learning from Experience and Emerging Stronger to Future Shocks, which was recently awarded the 2023 Outstanding Book or Monograph by the National Academy of Science and Technology in the Philippines. The second study, Building Resilient Education Systems, Cost-Effective Mobile Tutoring in the Philippines and Beyond, will be presented by Dr. Noam Angrist, Youth Impact co-founder and study co-author. It explored the impact of mEducation, a phone-based tutoring program on students in grades 3 and 4 during the pandemic. Joining us to provide valuable insights are the Second Congressional Commission on Education, or EDCOM 2 Executive Director, Dr. Karol Mark Yi, the Department of Education, Calapan City Schools Division Office Education Specialist, Cerilo Illaga, and the Bangsamoro Ministry of Basic, Higher, and Technical Education Curriculum Division Chief Yul Olaya. Thank you to all our speakers and to the IPA for this collaboration, to all our participants joining us on Zoom, and those watching via the PIDS and SERPI Facebook pages. Good afternoon. Let us enjoy listening to the presentations. I now give the floor to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marife, for that opening message. Indeed, we're very excited to learn more from our presenters and discuss together ways on how to overcome the many education challenges we are facing today. Before we proceed to the first presentation, we would first like to know from our audience their thoughts about the following poll question for today. So the question is, what key issues should policymakers and implementers prioritize to further improve the quality and delivery of education? Our audience can give their answers in one word or a phrase. To answer this question, you may use your phones or devices to scan the QR code flashed on the screen, or you may click the Mentimeter link in the Zoom chat. For our viewers on Facebook, you may click the link in the chat as well. But perhaps we can give you around 1 to 2 minutes to answer this question. And hopefully for later during our discussion at the Q&A session, we'll be able to answer, or we'll be able to discuss more about your thoughts and insights after the presentations today. Okay, hopefully you saw the QR code or the link. We can share the results and see what we have from our audience today. Okay, I see perhaps a number of our audience today answered the curriculum, teacher quality, training, student readiness, assessment of the K-12 program, yes, learning losses, especially now that we are trying to bounce back after the long school closures due to the COVID-19 pandemic, available facilities, addressing student needs. Yes, these are all, there are really a lot of challenges that we can identify in today's situation in the education sector. And hopefully really this webinar will help us think about what will be, how can we prioritize and how can we address these issues that are present today. Thank you so much for participating in our call. Okay, now we can proceed with the first presentation. Our first presenter is Dr. Aniceto Orbeta. He's the current president of the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, where he has served as senior research fellow since 1992. He is an economist interested in applied economic modeling, impact evaluation, education and labor market, social protection, demographic economics, and information and communication technologies. In addition, he has extensive experience in designing and conducting and teaching impact evaluation of programs, policies in education, social protection, judicial reforms, community-driven development, water services, agriculture, and agriculture finance. He has a PhD in economics from the University of the Philippines School of Economics and did his postdoctoral studies at Harvard University. Dr. Baves will be presenting a paper that focuses on the delivery of basic education during the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges faced in remote learning. His presentation is from the chapter of the PIDS book, The Philippines' Response to COVID-19, published last May 2022. Dr. Baves, you now have the virtual floor.
Thank you, Asa. The unprecedented shift to remote learning because of the pandemic, the question in everyone's mind is what kind of learning happened during the years of the pandemic. This paper tries to answer that question, but we'd like to also, as a backdrop, mention that almost all of you know that the 2018 PISA testing 15-year-olds and 2019 teams testing grade 4 showed that we performed poorly compared to other countries. So I'll try to describe what happened in our schools during using DepEd's administrative data and try to understand the patterns using a national representative survey data collected by at the beginning of the pandemic by the Philippine Statistics Authority. Next slide, please. I'll be using this outline, present the objectives and methodology. I will usually followed by a short description of government responses, the learner responses using DepEd data. And I'll describe the reachability of students and home support using National Representative Survey by the PSA. And I conclude the summary and recommendations. Next slide, please. I designed the study with 4 specific objectives, namely to describe the responses of the education sector to the pandemic and describe how the students reacted through the use of the offered learning modalities in the schools and explain the pattern of the learning modality using the household data, although this is a separate data set, and draw insights and recommendations to guide implementations of remote learning. Next slide, please. The study used two data sets. One is the school level enrollment data by learning modality from the Education Management Information System Division of the Planning Service of DepEd. This data has grade levels and types of schools. The original study used the school year 2020-2021, but later we were able to obtain similar data sets for the succeeding 2 school years, 2021-2022 and 2022-2023. And the other data that we use is the 2020 Annual Poverty Indicator Survey, which provides enrollment data by level and type of school, as well as the availability of household amenities such as internet connection, TV, radio, cell phone, and even household income. I also tried to find a correlates of having internet connection at home, and this analysis used the DICT National ICT Household Survey merging using regions. Let me now describe the government response to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So in the pandemic struck in March 2020, DepEd prepared the Basic Education Continuity Plan, or BELCP, to guide the education sector's response. It listed different learning delivery modes that could be used, including face-to-face, where there are low-risk distance learning modes, including print, online, TV, and radio, and a combination of these called blended and homeschooling. As we know, the government disallowed face-to-face learning starting school year 2021-2022. And another important feature is the streamlining of the learning competencies from 14,171 to 5,600, for a reduction of about 60%, calling this reduced set as the most essential learning competencies or MELCs. Next slide, please. This slide accompanying the BELCP are several laws and department orders, such as the Bayanihan, the important feature of which includes authorizing the hiring of learning support aides, or LSAs, or teacher assistants to help in the production and reproduction of modular learning materials, and a special budget for financing acquisition of laptops, internet connection load, the DepEd's TV and radio, subsidies and allowances and learning modules. In addition, DepEd orders were also issued to cover assessment and grading and the utilization of and the qualification of the LSAs. For me, the most important revealing aspect for which we have data to back up our claims is the learners' responses to the offered learning modalities. This is what we discussed in the next slide. Next slide, please. Trying to understand what happened in basic education, it was fortunate that DepEd included data gathering on the learning modality utilized by students for school year 2020-21, which we all know went into remote learning when the pandemic hit in March 2020. This was the most extensive data set that can describe what happened during that school year in the next two years. We would have wanted to know the extent of learning as well, but unfortunately, we were not able to get data if that is available. This graph summarizes a very informative pattern of learning modality. One important pattern is that regardless of the level, almost all public school students use printed modules, 90% in elementary, 83% in junior high school, and 80% in senior high school. On the other hand, we only see a considerable proportion of online students using online learning in private schools, with 46% elementary, 36% in junior high school, and 44% in senior high school. Many describe this as a reflection of the digital divide, in this case, between public and private schools. Another pattern that where there is a considerable online learning in private schools, there is also considerable blended learning. A likely explanation for this is as unreliable internet connection. The state of the internet connection where it is available is such that pure online learning cannot be continuously conducted, and blended learning or a combination of the learning modes is necessary. Finally, I would like also to highlight that TV and radio did not figure prominently among the learning modes. This fact is important because we will see later that many households have TV and radio. To better understand this general pattern, an important question that comes to mind is whether this is more because of the lack of capacities to deliver online learning in schools, or even if available capacities, even with available capacities in schools, the households cannot avail of the online learning. I answer this in two ways. One is to look at the distribution by area, by region. The lack of basic internet infrastructure can explain an area's lack of online learning. The other one is use of the availability of internet connection, even with availability of internet connection in the area, and the amenities of the allow what's kind of learning may also explain this disparity. The next slide is devoted to this. But before this, let us look at, as I've said, we have data of the same this is for school years 2020-2021, the beginning of the pandemic. And we have data for the next 2 years. Next slide, please. Show you the one happening in 2022-2023. The data for school year 2021 to 2022 has almost the same pattern as 2020-2021. Here, we have now face-to-face. This is the khaki color in the graph. As shown, more of the public school students are in face-to-face compared to private. In contrast, more students in private schools are in blended modality compared to public school students. So noticeable is that the proportion of online students have been reduced to single digits, and 1 in 10 public schools are still in printed modules. Trying to understand this national pattern, let's start with the distribution of learning modality by regions and by level. This graph tells you what happened in 2021 for the elementary and public and private. And the graph on the left shows the distribution of learning modality for public elementary. The graph on the right is the corresponding graph of private schools. For public schools, it's shown that except for NCR, where the proportion of students printed module is only 50%, more than 80% of students are on printed module for the rest of the regions. Now compare that with the graph on the right, describing the distribution in private schools. We see that as much as 65% of students in private schools are using online mode in the NCR. This graph tells us that just comparing the public and private, both NCR will tell you that the internet availability in the area is not the one that drives the access to online modality. Internet may be available in the area, but the disparity in the mode of access reveal that public school students cannot afford online access, at least the kind of access conducive to online learning. Not having access at home and intermittent access are not conducive for online learning. Next slide, please. This is what happened in school year 2022-2023. As mentioned earlier, you already have face-to-face at this level, as this graph tells you distribution by region. Most of the regions, except for BARM, regions 2, 6, 8, 9, and 4A, have a majority of public school students on face-to-face. For the aforementioned region, the blended learning are the model groups. For private schools, then, on the other hand, more students are in blended learning than in face-to-face, except for few regions like Caraga, Region 12, and 4B. Next slide, please. This is for junior high school. Not surprisingly, this pattern is repeated in the next level, junior high school, in most public and private. Again, so except in the NCR, where there's considerable online students and blended mode, and private junior high school students, a similar pattern as elementary, we obtained in elementary grades. Next slide, please. So the same thing happens for 2022-2023. This with public school, junior high school shifting to face-to-face, but with smaller number of regions having majority of the students in face-to-face classes. 6 out of the 17, and 2 regions, regions 2 and 3, having majority of the students in blended mode. In the case of private school, junior high school students, while some have shifted to face-to-face, most are in blended mode, except for regions 11, 12, and 4B. Again, the proportion in the online mode has been reduced to single digits, except for NCR. Next slide, please. This is for senior high school. Also, the pattern is substantially repeated for senior high school for 2020-2021. And next slide, please. The same thing happens also for school year 2020-23. Okay. So next slide, please. Now we turn to the reachability as described in the modality of learning used by the student using enrollment data. The household data is the APIS 2020 data set. This data set has enrollment data by level and by type of school, but does not include learning modality. In addition, it has data on availability of school amenities that allow remote learning and income. I use measures of availability of amenities for remote learning, as indicators of reachability. Reachability for remote learning is indicated by the availability of home internet access as well as access to TV, radio, and cell phones. Let's start with home internet access. The next slide, please. This graph shows the distribution of enrolled students by level and by type of school. It says that only 12% of students have access to broadband internet at home. I want to point out that you may have heard higher internet access from other data sources. Let me highlight that this paper refers to broadband internet access at home. The use of broadband internet at home is deliberate because that is the only connection that effectively enables continuous learning, and the others are not. But what is more important is that internet access for students enrolled in private schools compared to those enrolled in public school. You have see that those students enrolled in public schools are very much higher, 60 versus 9% in elementary, 47 versus 9% in junior high school, and 37 versus 10% in senior high school. This result strongly explains the disparity of use of printed modules and online learning between public and private schools shown earlier in the enrollment data by modality. Next slide, please. So this is the, try to explain what's the correlates of broadband internet at home. Right? We know that home and area characteristics explain the availability of broadband internet at home. I use the presence of the broadband internet infrastructure in the area from Albert et al. Which uses the DICT household ICT survey and merge it with APs using regional identification. Note that the presence of broadband infra in that survey is measured by the proportion of surveyed barangays with broadband infrastructure, such as ISP, fiber optic cable, and free public and private Wi-Fi and free public telecom tower. The results are revealing. What are reported in the table are standardized coefficients, which should be interpreted in standard deviation units. It shows that the presence of broadband infrastructure is the most important correlate to the availability of broadband internet at home. It says that one standard deviation of change in the presence of broadband infrastructure is correlated with 0.45 standard deviation change in the availability of broadband internet at home. And this is followed by per capita income at 34 SD and family size is 19 SD and parents with high school education at 11 SD. Next slide, please. In the case of TV and radio, the disparity in access is not too different between public and private schools. In addition, I'd like to highlight is the access is quite high, 80% and above for TV and 35% and above for radio. Recall that I already mentioned that the enrollment data, this modality it did not figure well. You can't even see them in the graphs. Even given this high availability of these amenities in households. Next slide, please. Finally, this graph shows you the availability of cell phones. Again, there is no large disparity in public and private school students. More importantly, access is almost universal. Now that you have shown so far that the average of reachability, how about the reachability by socioeconomic class? We should this next. Next slide, please. This graph describes the reachability by the different access devices through income classes, which is shown is that there's large disparities in access to broadband and computer, but not so much for TV, radio, and cell phone. These patterns have clear implications for learning across income classes using these devices. Now, finally, let us look at the quality of home support for learning. Our earlier analysis of PISA 2018 revealed that even in a face-to-face learning mode, the quality of home support is strongly correlated with test scores. In teachers' absence, the importance of home support for learning should even become more critical. I tried to describe this by the highest qualification of the parents, especially the proportion of at least high school graduates. The average proportion of parents who have high school graduates is 10%. For the richest quintile, this is 28%, and for the lowest quintile, this is 3%. On top of the disparity in access of the remote learning devices by income class, is also the disparity in the quality of home support. Again, this will have profound implications on remote learning. Next slide. So this is the summary before proceeding. Let me summarize and in 6 statements. Most of the students in public schools use printed modules for all levels, elementary, junior high school, and senior high school at the onset of the pandemic. This has shifted to face-to-face last school year for public, but not so much for the private schools, where more students are on blended learning. Second, only the private schools only in private schools does one find a considerable proportion of students on online and blended learning at the beginning of the pandemic. But those in the online mode has been reduced to single digits, while blended learning has increased substantially in the last school year. This has significant there's significant disparity in internet access at home, particularly as I've said, broadband internet access that's conducive for learning between students in public and private schools across all education levels. This explains the difference in the use of learning between modes and between public and private students. Fourth, the availability of internet at home is correlated with the presence of broadband infrastructure in the area of any income. The availability of TV and radio is high, and there's not much difference between public and private schools. But this is not reflected in the use of the modality. This is also true in terms of equality in access between public and private students in cell phones, even with higher availability. The wide disparity in the distribution of the other parents in high school graduates also across income quantiles is also shown. Next slide, please. So last 2 slides, this is given this, what are the insights that we can get? One is that online learning mode will not reach most public school students. However, forward-looking, learning online may sound, and even if available in public schools, most students will not have will not be able to access it at home. I mean, I say online, it's continuous online learning. Hence, the desire to build online learning capacity at this time will not be most effective at present. Desirable it may be over the long term. So the question that you asked, what can be used then? I think we have an answer in the next paper that will be presented. Second, the primary and exigent concern is to support the learning of the most popular mode, is printed mode in the beginning of the pandemic, and last school year, it's besides face-to-face is blended learning. What is needed is supporting the most the printed mode, but the World Bank household survey mentioned by Vice President Ballesteros in the opening remarks highlighted the lack of interaction between teachers and students during the pandemic. Examples of using cell phones to improve the interaction amongst teachers, students, and parents are available. There are existing studies on the effectiveness of cell phone-based interventions. This will be presented by Noam next in this forum. We cannot wait for most of households to have the reliable internet connection that enables online learning. Learning must continue now, and we need to be strategic in using technology to enable learning. Third one is that education delivery through TV and radio needs to be improved. The lack of taking up of TV and radio-based learning, despite the high proportion of ownership, indicates that there's a need to understand what is preventing a greater use of these broadcast modalities. Next slide, please. Address the disparity in the quality of home support by socioeconomic class. In the absence of teachers, home support is critical. Data indicates that the disparity in the quality of home support by socioeconomic class. One possible way of addressing this is the use of learning support aids that we have harnessed during the pandemic to target support for poorer households. Next is address the anticipated learning disparity by socioeconomic with remote learning. Since it is clear that remote learning as practice discriminates against the students of the poorer households because of lack of interaction and more inferior quality of home support, intervention that counteract this tendency should be found. And examples I've already mentioned, the increasing the interaction between teachers, pupils, and parents using printed modules, and also as we will see next is the use of cell phones. target the home sport for children with low educated parents should also be explored. The last one is to recognize the need for a massive remedial measures to address low test scores. Even as we already know, even the pandemic, I mentioned already that we were not performing well even before the pandemic. So the pandemic only exacerbated the problems. We need to devise ways to come back from that kind of this of poor performance and for our children. We need to realize that these remedial measures should recognize the expected disparity in learning across income classes by focusing on students from low-income households. I think that's my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Babes for that very informative presentation. I think it's great that we start our session by painting a picture of what the learning environment looks like during the time of the pandemic using the data that we have. And we're able to see what is actually available and accessible to households. And this actually sets a tone on thinking about what potential education interventions can be designed to address the disparities in access and quality of education. And based on the results that Dr. Babes presented, we find that cell phones are actually more widely accessible and available at home compared to internet connection and other devices. And as phones allow two-way communication between teachers and students or teachers' parents, we can think about how it can be utilized as a good complement to learning modules or other learning strategies, since phones enable that kind of interaction for our teachers and students. And that important insight brings us to our next presentation, which will talk about a learning intervention that delivers simple math instruction using mobile phones. The program is called mEducation, or short for Mobile Education, which was designed, adapted, and tested in the Philippines during the time of the pandemic. To speak more about the mEducation program, we have Mr. Rene Marlon Panti, also known as Jepoy, a research manager of IPA Philippines. Jepoy manages the Philippines Socioeconomic Panel Survey and leads the mEducation project in the Philippines. He also managed an impact evaluation of the conditional cash transfer program of the government and a study on financial interoperability. Before joining IPA, he was a lecturer at the Department of Economics of the Ateneo de Manila University, a research associate at the Human Development Network Philippines, and a field coordinator for the Behavioral Insights team. He holds an MA in Economics from the University of the Philippines. Jepoy, over to you.
Thanks, Isha. Miss there. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our presentation. I will now talk more about the intervention that hopefully can address some of the concerns that Dr. Orbeta raised. So our program, as Isha mentioned, is called mEducation. And I am part of the team that implemented mEducation in the Philippines. And throughout my 10-minute presentation, I will be walking you through what the program is about. I also just want to highlight that mEducation was made possible through the collaboration of IPA, Youth Impact, and DepEd. So IPA, where I work, is a nonprofit organization, and our main goal is to discover and advance what works to improve lives of people living in poverty. We operate in 22 country offices, and we've done more than 900 evaluations in 51 countries. We also focus on different program areas, including education, health, and financial inclusion. In the Philippines, IPA started in 2002, and our partnership with DepEd started in 2015. We signed another 5-year MOU in 2020 to strengthen our cooperation. And we also have an existing data sharing agreement to support DepEd in generating evidence on education programs. Meanwhile, Youth Impact is also a global NGO headquartered in Botswana. Like IPA, it promotes evidence-based policy interventions. It is for the youth, by youth, and it has reached more than 130,000 youth with health and education programs in 11 countries. It has also an existing MOU in Botswana to scale evidence-based programs nationally through the government. So now over to our intervention or program that we implemented. So mEducation. So this program was motivated by the school closures during the pandemic. We know, as Dr. Orbeta mentioned a while ago, that higher income families had easier access to alternative sources of instruction. Many low-income families did not. In fact, in a survey conducted by IPA at the onset of remote learning or blended learning, we found that households cited the lack of access to internet devices and learning materials as their major challenges. And given that these challenges, not just during the pandemic, but also up to now, or that there are these challenges up to now, the main question really is how to provide quality instruction to learners, and how can we get parents more involved in their children's learning. And the answer we found was through the use of traditional cell phones, basic cell phones that do not need 3G or Wi-Fi or any special applications, cell phones that only need to receive text messages and phone calls. And this type of intervention fits our country profile so well because, as mentioned by Dr. Orbeta a while ago, 80 to 90% of households across socioeconomic classes have at least an access to a basic phone. And in essence, our intervention, called mEducation, mobile education, is a mobile-based math learning program using SMS and phone calls to support student learning and improve parental engagement. So this was originally piloted in Botswana by Youth Impact, and then we tested it here in the Philippines among more than 3,000 grade 3 and grade 4 students across 130 schools. And the program is very simple. So every week for 8 weeks, households would receive weekly SMS exercises followed by a 20-minute tutorial session through the phone. In more detail, it begins with us, IPA, sending a set of math exercises through SMS to participating households. We usually send these SMS messages on a Monday, and these are one-way messages. So households are not required to respond to these messages. It's just a way for us to encourage parents and students to study together. And then within the same week, the teacher would call the household for the tutorial. And I think this is the core intervention. So the tutorial is targeted to the child's level. It means that if a child is struggling with subtraction, the topic for the week will be subtraction, and the child won't get promoted to the next level or to the next higher operation until he or she has mastered subtraction. And we do it in only 20 minutes. And the way we do it is by asking only 2 questions. The first question is a problem that the student and the teacher would solve together. And then the second question is of the question that the student has to solve on his or her own. So the performance of the student on both questions would inform the teacher if that student would be promoted to the next operation the next week. If the student, and as we've seen in our experience, some students would take a while, for example, to master a certain operation. For several weeks, we would spend the same operation so that the student gets to learn the foundational or skills on solving that kind of problem. So after the 2 questions, the teacher would then schedule the call for the next week. And here, in our core intervention, we want to emphasize that this program combines elements of tutoring and teaching at the right level that are both proven approaches to improving learning outcomes. And all the while the tutorial is happening, the parent and the guardian is beside the child. So the guardian knows what is being taught and how his or her child is performing. This way, the parent or the guardian will be able to provide appropriate support to the child moving forward. So in the Philippines, we implemented the program across 3 regions, representing each major island group, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. It involved 110 schools and around 3,400 students who were randomly assigned to treatment and control groups. So we've already done this intervention twice. The first one we implemented in 2021, where we hired teaching aides or DepEd teacher applicants to conduct the intervention. And during that time, since they were full-time tutors that were working with us, we assigned them 20 students per week. And because of the success of the implementation through the teacher aides, we then implemented the program with volunteer DepEd teachers. So these now, in 2022, we implemented the program through actual DepEd teachers. And because we know how much DepEd teachers' load is, we assigned them only 3 students per week. So on average, they would spend only 1.5 hours per week on the intervention. And for both models, we followed the same protocols to make sure that DepEd was consulted and that the tutors were well equipped with the skills needed for the intervention. We usually do an orientation first with schools and school divisions, and then we conduct trainings with our teachers or tutors. We then get a consent from targeted households and do a baseline assessment that would inform the first week of lesson that the student will receive. And then we implement the 8-week program, again, tutorial plus teaching at the right level. And at the end, we would conduct an end-line assessment. We conducted an end-line assessment to measure the effectiveness of the intervention. And you might ask, like, what are the requirements to implement the program? And we would say that it's really very minimal. For teachers, only a mobile phone and time for a 3-day training at most, and time for the weekly tutorial. And for the households, even less so, because they would only need a mobile phone, again, a basic mobile phone, and time, maybe in plus a pen and paper for the lessons itself that the students would have. And this intervention is taking off globally. We have reached more than 15,000 students in total, and this intervention was delivered by over 500 educators in different contexts. So as a testament to the efficacy and adaptability of the program, it is equally effective in the implementation in Kenya, Nepal, India, and Uganda. And now for the more exciting part, probably, I would turn you over to Isha again to introduce Noam to present the results of the study. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jepoy, and thank you for providing us with an overview of the mEducation program. Before we proceed to the next presentation, just want to point out that I think what's great about this program is that it's quite simple, just using mobile phones to deliver information, deliver instruction, which is actually not brand new, but I think what this program provides is a simple and structured way for teachers to deliver effective remote instruction for additional learning support at home. So now that we laid the foundation of what the program is about, we are now ready to hear and learn about the evidence on the impact of the mEducation program. To present the evidence of the program, we are pleased to have Dr. Noam Angrist with us today. So Noam is a researcher and expert in bridging the gap between evidence-based practices and policy implementation for the betterment of youth. As co-founder of Youth Impact, he has successfully scaled evidence-based programs benefiting over 150,000 youth across 10 countries. Noam has advised institutions such as the World Bank and UNICEF, helping develop metrics for improved learning outcomes in low and middle-income countries. Noam is also the academic director for the What Works Hub for Global Education at the University of Oxford. He holds a BS Mathematics and Economics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a PhD in Public Policy from the University of Oxford. Noam's presentation is based on the recently published paper, Building Resilient Education Systems, Evidence from Large-Scale Randomized Trials in 5 Countries. Noam, over to you.
Thank you, Isha, and thank you, everyone. I just want to start by saying what an honor and a privilege it is to be here with all of you. 350 people, then you know you're talking about something interesting and important. And what an incredible collaboration it's been with DepEd, IPA, and it's been great to connect with EDCOM and Philippines Institute for Development Studies and just everyone here. I think what we've done is actually quite historic, and I'm going to talk about a few reasons why. Let me just share my screen. And I think both Dr. Orbeta and Jepoy Nisha have set this up so well. So the title of this research that we've been doing, we've called it Building Resilience in Education Systems. And I'm going to talk specifically about the effectiveness of this mEducation program, but I also want to zoom out to kind of broader issues in the education sector. One thing I also want to say, I'm sure many of us have heard of learning loss, and I think something that's refreshing today is we're not just talking about the loss, we're also talking about some solutions, which is very nice in terms of things we can do to address learning loss. Okay, so youth impact we covered. We are a non-governmental organization that is committed to scaling up and generating evidence in health and education. We run lots of studies, we scale things, we work with governments, and so forth. I think Jepoy covered this. This work on mEducation, the initial study came from Botswana. That's where Youth Impact is headquartered. We actually generated the world's first evidence on distance education anywhere in the world. And we did it within a few months of school closures in the pandemic. Schools closed in March of 2020. And then by April, we already had some results. And by July, we had a paper out. And for those here who are familiar, that is very unusual speed, but that is what the challenge required. And we ran a randomized control trial. And this phone-based program worked. I mean, it improved learning. We published it in Nature Human Behavior, and it got a lot of attention. And the program was effective. It was some of the first evidence during the pandemic, and it was cheap and it was cost-effective. So there was tremendous interest around the world to replicate this. And I'm going to jump to the results of what we found as we replicated this. So Jepoy shared that we had then done this across 5 countries beyond Botswana, including in the Philippines with DepEd and IPA. We also did it in other countries, in Kenya, in Nepal, in India, in Uganda. Now, there's a few things that were historic about the Philippines study and the 5-country study beyond Botswana. One is, I believe this is actually one of DepEd's first randomized trials in education. So that's really exciting just to see DepEd leading the charge on rigorous evidence production on these kinds of solutions. And DepEd has just been such a fantastic lead and partner of this study and effort. The other thing that is historic is there's very few studies that happen across multiple countries at the same time. Often we have one study in one place, but not in another. And so the question becomes, okay, it worked somewhere, but can it scale? Can it scale with the government? And one of the really unusual things is we tested this both across 5 countries. And in the Philippines, we actually had one study that was with teacher aides, and IPA was more involved, but one was government teachers, and it was really led by DepEd. So we can see if this can work with the system, not just in a small study. And what you can see here with the results is in all 5 countries, the phone call combined with the SMS, it worked. Those green arrows mean it worked. It's kind of amazing. And it worked everywhere. We've almost never seen that happen. So sometimes it works one place, but not elsewhere. The fact that it worked everywhere is historic. This is something that can really, really work and scale. And you can see in the Philippines, it worked particularly well, 0.45 standard deviations. Now, bear with me. We don't all love standard deviations. So I'm going to come to talk about what that actually means in practice, but that's big. Okay, the average effect in education is 0.1. Actually, half of things in education don't work at all. The things that do work, it's 0.1. So 0.45 is big. So what happened in the Philippines was really exciting, and it's generating a lot of interest. So this is really, really exciting and historic. Now, why is this working so well? I think Dr. Orbeta set this up so nicely. It's the platform and the pedagogy. So it's the platform in that it's the phone, right? Dr. Orbeta showed there's just not that much access to internet. Something didn't quite work out with phone and TV, but almost everyone has a phone. It's a way to reach people where they are in a way they're comfortable. And we're not using phones enough to reach people with education. The other thing keep in mind about the phone is it was a phone call. It wasn't a fancy app. It was very simple. We all call our friends and family, and we just called. So this is tutoring, it's targeted instruction over the phone. So the phone helps reach people where they are in a way that they're comfortable. The other thing is the pedagogy. So it's focused on foundational literacy and numeracy. It's focused on reaching children at their level, targeting instruction to their level. A child who can't add is taught to add. A child who can't subtract is taught to subtract. That sounds very obvious, but we know that often doesn't happen in the education system. Often in the education system, we follow a curricula, and maybe the curricula says my grade 5 student is supposed to know fractions, but they can't count, but we still teach them fractions, right? So we're not teaching at their level. And so the idea is to assess them and use that assessment to teach at their level. So it's the platform and it's the pedagogy, and it's combining best practices like tutoring, like targeted instruction. And so we're really seeing it work everywhere. It's historic. I mean, I have to say, this is one of the most exciting efforts and studies I've ever been a part of, and maybe ever will. So thank you everyone who made this happen. It's so exciting. And it's cheap, less than $12 per child, less than $6.50 in of course, your local currency, right? So this is affordable, this can scale. It's very exciting. Okay, I'm trying to go to the next. Okay, now, I said that we did it both with an NGO delivery and also with a government delivery. Oh, sorry, let me actually go back. One thing I should also say, we didn't only test the phone call, we also tested what happens if you only have an SMS. The SMS only results were less exciting. Okay, so in some places they work, in some places they didn't. And even when they work, they don't work as well. So there's something about the SMS, but it's not enough. You kind of need the phone call to get the really exciting results. Okay. Now I said that there was this study both with the NGO and with the government. And so what you can see here, this is results from Philippines and Nepal, where in both of those countries, we had government and NGO delivery separated. And you can see the government effects were as big, if not slightly bigger than the NGO. Again, this is also very exciting because it's working with government teachers and in the government system. So we're really excited to explore the potential for scale with DepEd and partners. It looks like it can, and we're excited to take those steps. Okay, since we don't all love standard deviations, what does this actually mean? Okay, so here what you can see here is proficiencies. Okay, how many kids can add, how many kids can subtract, how many kids can multiply, how many kids can divide. Okay, keep in mind these kids are in grades 3 and 4. So one thing I want to draw your attention to, if you look at the far right, only 3% of children in the control group, kids who are not getting an intervention, can divide in grade 3 and 4. 3%. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that is a grade level expectation. That means 3% of children can reach that. So there is a learning crisis, right? And it's, we're missing some of the foundational skills. Now, this is true in many places. Of course, it's not just true in the Philippines. And I know many in the room here have been sounding the alarm on this for some time. What you can see is in the treatment group where they're receiving the program, you go from 3% to essentially 17, 18% can divide. Okay, so that is 15% percentage point improvement in just 3 hours. 3 hours, 20 minutes once a week for 8 weeks. Okay, so what does that mean? If you did this program for essentially 1 week full time, almost all children could divide. Okay, so children have been in grades, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they can't divide, but in 1 week you can do this. So not all hope is lost. We can get there. There's ways to do it. The challenge now is how do we scale these things that can really work? And you can see the gains are really big in multiplication and subtraction across the board. These are big. A multiplication from 23 to 46%, doubling in just 3 hours. So there's things that can work. And the challenge before us now is scaling this, actually. Another thing I wanted to highlight, I mentioned that it's the platform, it's the phone call, and it's also the pedagogy. It's the targeting of the instruction, teaching to the children's level, not just a one-size-fits-all syllabus. Now, how targeted was the instruction? We measured that. Okay, was it the case that children who couldn't add were taught addition, children who couldn't subtract were taught subtraction? It's actually not that easy to target instruction. We found in the study in the Philippines, 65% of the time instruction was targeted, which is very good, actually. In fact, it was better than our original study in Botswana, where we targeted instruction 41% of the time. That's one of the reasons we think it worked so well in the Philippines. So as we think about scaling, one question is how to make sure the instruction is still very well targeted. Now, on the far left, what I want to draw your attention to is what we find is when you don't have programs like this, what percentage of the instruction is targeted? Less than 1%, 0.9. So this is a huge revolution in trying to get the instruction taught at the right level of the child, but it's possible and it works. Okay. The other thing is, not only did this approach work, people liked it. That's always good news. You know, if it works and people don't like it, it's going to be very hard to scale politically, right? But people like it. 97% of parents and caregivers said they liked it. And another feature of what we were doing here is the phone calls were happening to the household. And, you know, parents were, you know, they were given options. They could either put the phone on speaker and leave. They could put the phone on speaker and stay, or they could co-participate. We left it up to the parents, but they loved it. They loved seeing that their children were getting something. And because they were often the ones who had the phone and they passed it to their child. Sometimes it was a sibling, a grandparent, a cousin, whoever was available, we worked with. People liked it. It was kind of amazing. So I think there's lots of themes here. There's things around technology. There's things around effective pedagogy. There's things around caregiver engagement. And these challenges aren't going away. Dr. Orbeta showed that still there's lots of blended learning approaches, and I'm going to touch on more of those things. So we still need this. We always need to engage caregivers and parents in education. There's benefits beyond learning. We found big benefits actually for children's ambition level and their love of learning. Because they're enjoying and getting attention through the phone and one-on-one, we saw some of these other things improve as well. And I mentioned cost effectiveness. It's actually one of the most cost-effective approaches in education, period. So it's not just cost-effective in general, it's one of the most cost-effective. Now, another thing that happened, as of course everyone here knows all too well, is during this period there was a typhoon, Typhoon Rai, and that was another disruption. It wasn't just COVID that was disrupting schools, and I've come to learn that this is actually very common in the world, in the Philippines. The program kept working. It's kind of amazing. And so even though the typhoon itself reduced learning because it disrupted school even further, when we followed up, we saw that kids who were in the phone call group, they still had benefits. Not all was lost. So we're seeing that this can persist through multiple types of disruption. Here's a figure of disruptions. COVID was one disruption, but there's lots of disruptions. Again, I know many in the room know this, and I know you experienced this a lot in the Philippines with weather. I saw someone actually earlier on today said, good, hello from kind of the rains. These things disrupt school, right? Typhoons. So we need a resilient approach. It can't be a surprise every time. We need to have approaches that can work when these disruptions happen. And we're seeing that this phone-based approach can really work. It can reach people where they are. It can provide that quality education. So how do we build that into our resilience strategy? You can see here is a map of various kind of disruptions in various countries over the years. Sometimes it's a flood. Sometimes it's a monsoon rain. Sometimes it's an earthquake. Sometimes it's a water shortage. Sometimes it's pollution. Sometimes it's an earthquake. Sometimes it's an election. We have disruptions all the time, and we need evidence-based approaches to build resilience into the education system. There's a few themes and lessons. So one on the left here is around emergency responses and actually not treating them as a surprise, right? Having these resilient evidence-based tools and approaches like phone-based education. There's also non-emergency lessons around targeting instruction, around technology. We know there's a big focus on ICT and technology, but we also know technology is not always working for us. Sometimes we give people laptops and they don't use them, or there's no internet connection. The nice thing about the phone is people already have it. So you can move away from the device to the program, right? You can kind of jump into the program. And so I think we need to think about technology, not just as the devices, but actually using what people have and making it work. And then approaches around tutoring. These phone calls were one-on-one. They were really cheap and scalable way of tutoring. So there's many themes here and lessons. And I didn't even mention caregiver engagement, which is so important. Okay, so next steps. One of the very exciting things is this study has worked. There's a strong collaboration with DepEd, and we've been in active conversations with DepEd about what it takes to scale. And I'd love to hear from people here. I see there's people from the region, headquarters, schools. I'd love to hear from people. What do you think it would take to get this really scaling across in your regions, across the country, how to do it? I mean, you're the expert. So if you can guide and advise, we'd love to hear from you. But we're in really exciting conversations about next steps. Okay. There's more to learn. We haven't learned everything. Yes, we have a lot of evidence, but we want to keep learning. We want to keep making it more cost effective, more scalable. So we're going to keep learning. And then we're also going to try this, we want to try it in the normal school system, right? Through the kind of, even when there's no disruption, but we also want to think about this disruption response. So we want both. How do we do it in business as usual? And how do we make it resilient to disruption? And so there's some really exciting discussions the IPA team is leading with FARM and UNICEF around what this could look like in that region. Okay, that's the end for me. And just to say again, what a treat it has been to collaborate with the partners here. It really is, I think, one of the most exciting efforts happening in education in the world today. One of the most exciting efforts of connecting evidence to action, of government leadership. And I hope this is the beginning and there's more to come. So thank you. And I'll turn it back to you, Isha, as the brilliant MC.
Thank you so much, Noam, for sharing those exciting results. It really was an amazing and collaborative effort, and we're grateful that we're still continuing to work together with our partners, because there is such a lot of potential to scale this up and to reach more students to help improve learning outcomes. So we see from the presentation, not only does the evidence show that simple 20-minute one-on-one targeted tutoring works, but we also see how equally effective government delivery is, which points out to the simplicity and adaptability of this program for wider implementation. And it's also very encouraging to know that it is low cost and is a cost-effective, or one of the most cost-effective programs in education that resulted in high learning gains. And as Noam said, not all hope is lost. We can leverage what is accessible to our learners, and then we can reach them to where they are. Okay, at this point, if you have any questions about the presentations or director speakers, you're welcome to send them via Zoom or via the FB chat. I think Mai from PIDS provided some instructions on the chat as well. So we'll get to your questions in just a few minutes. Okay, so after hearing these two studies, these two presentations, we're now going to hear from our reactors from the government, both from the national and field offices, on their thoughts and reactions to the findings and recommendations of the studies, and how it may help inform their own respective programs and initiatives to address the many challenges in the basic education sector. So first, we would like to hear insights from the national level, whose office is tasked to assess the education system in the Philippines and provide policy recommendations for reform. We're pleased to have Dr. Karol Marquis, the Executive Director of the Second Congressional Commission on Education, or EDCOM 2. He recently completed his PhD at the University of Cambridge as a scholar of the Jardine Foundation at the Cambridge Trust. He is currently a faculty at Ateneo de Manila University, a research fellow at the University of the Philippines Center for Integrative and Development Studies, a research athlete at the Program for Research on Private Higher Education at the State University of New York in Albany. Dr. E, over to you.
Thank you, Isha. I'll just share my screen. And is that okay? All right. I hope it's working.
Yes.
Magandang hapon po sa lahat. It's also my pleasure to be here and also to be a discussant to two exciting and important studies that were undertaken by Dr. Babes Orbeta as well as Noam and Jepoy. Of course, the three of them are longtime partners, and we've been discussing a lot, and we've been working closely on EDCOM and what we can do together in order to find solutions to the problems that we are facing, especially in terms of poor learning outcomes that we need to really find urgent solutions for, especially in the primary years. So I have a presentation, but I'll use the opportunity to also present about EDCOM 2, because maybe not everyone understands the work of the Commission. So I'll do that first and then go to the points. So what is EDCOM 2? EDCOM 2 was passed in July of 2022 through Republic Act 11899 with the mandate of conducting a comprehensive national assessment and evaluation of the performance of the Philippine education sector. So our mandate for the next 3 years, beginning January of this year, is to find solutions to improve learning outcomes. And this is from early childhood all the way to higher education and lifelong learning. Because it's a congressional commission, we're composed of senators and congressmen who are chairs of the respective committees of education, both basic and higher and technical vocational education in the Senate and the House. So we are joined by Senator Win, Senator Cheese, Kong Roman, as well as Kong Mark Go, as well as Senator Sunny Angara, Senator Pia Cayetano, Senator Joel Villanueva, Kong Kiko Benitez, Kong Khalid de Maporo, and Kong PJ Garcia. So legislators also not a stranger to education and the work of really improving education outcomes for our students. It's also EDCOM 2 because there was an EDCOM 1 in 1991, just as a historical context, that the first EDCOM 1 was convened after the EDSA revolution to study the problems of the Philippine education sector and to not find solutions that are piecemeal, but instead systems level. I think the most important, if not the more remembered recommendations of EDCOM 1 that were then pursued was the creation of DepEd, CHED, and TESDA, or the trifocalization of the Department of Education, Culture, and Sports. But there were also other recommendations that they put forward, such as the licensure examination for teachers, as well as the Early Years Act, for example, and investing in the early childhood education of our learners. However, there were also unimplemented reforms. The creation of a National Council for Education, the creation of a National Testing and Evaluation Agency, the creation of an Education Statistics Office, and finally, the creation of a Center for Leading-Edge Educational Technologies to advance the educational promise of affordable technologies. So in a way, I'd say that if you read the reports of EDCOM 1, most of the reports and the recommendations are actually still very much relevant today. In fact, they were very forward-thinking in terms of their recommendations. But between then and now, we still are facing the same problems in terms of teacher quality, poor learning outcomes. So a lot of these things we are still grappling with, and a lot of the challenges that we're facing in 2023 are still similar to the problems that you would see in many studies and reviews and surveys conducted in the education system from as early as 1925 in the Monroe Survey, in the 1945, 1949, 1970, 1988, year 2000, and in the EDCOM 1 reports, still similar challenges: admin burden of teachers, poor learning outcomes, the need for decentralization, the need for remediation and guidance counseling. So all of these things are still challenges that we face. For EDCOM 2 in the next 3 years, what we've done is to focus our energies on 28 priorities. And this spans from early childhood care and development. In fact, we just finished our hearing today on nutrition and feeding because of a lot of our learners, especially from 0 to 4, are not getting the nutrition they need to actually develop well in order to pursue and complete higher levels of schooling, as well as some challenges in the governance and financing and then the supply of child development centers and child development workers. For basic education, we're looking at challenges in learning resources, the procurement of textbooks, the measurement of learning outcomes, and I'll go back to that later, curriculum and instruction, or how to decongest the K-12 curriculum, and also their efforts there, the need for classrooms that are still lacking, ALS, and also home and school environment, also relevant to this talk. We've also found, for example, that the Philippines is one of the countries with the highest incidences of bullying, and that is also contributing to poor learning. We're also looking at higher education, how to improve equity and access to quality higher education, teacher education and development, TVET and lifelong learning, and governance and finance. So napakarami pong inaaral na sabay-sabay, and PIDS is our good partner in finding solutions to all of this. First, to understand and diagnose the problems and what is the root cause of it, and then to look at solutions in order to put forward legislation that could help us resolve these challenges once and for all. When it comes to technology, recently we put together a task force to look at technology and how it can enable us to reach our goal of improving learning outcomes more efficiently and effectively. I guess one question we are asking also, which is, I guess, relevant to this conversation is, what type of technology and for whom? And for whom will it work more or better so that we could use the right technology for the right learner or for the right stage? some insights from the two studies that I think are particularly informative for the work of the Commission are the following: that most public school students, as stressed by Dr. Babes, don't have access to internet, both in school and at home. And that the difference and the discrepancy in terms of access is very clear among public and private students, and also low SES and high SES. For example, 9% for elementary students in public compared to 60% in private schools, and only 3% of the poorest quintile have internet access at home compared to 46% in the richest quintile. He also stressed that other technologies could be leveraged because of high accessibility to learners, such as television at 82%, cell phone at 93%, and radio at 37%. And that is why we are fortunate that Noam and his team have worked on this study that shows us about the usefulness of cell phones in terms of learning interventions. We also see that the quality of home support affects children's learning. In fact, one of the studies that we've commissioned for EDCOM 2 is really understanding the home or the community that the child goes home to, because we know that a lot of Filipino families, parents are not home because they're overseas workers or that they've migrated internally to Manila. And so who provides the support when the child goes home? Who helps tutor the child? Who helps guide the child? And even in the early years, who provides the early rearing that the child is needing to be able to transition to formal schooling? From the IPA study, we see the importance or the power of text messages combined with phone call check-ins in improving learning in math, as well as one good insight that I think we could use is the implementation of both DepEd and IPA resulted in similar gains among learners. I think in our conversations on teacher quality, a lot are saying, oh, but we need to improve teaching quality first. But it shows us that with the right intervention, the right combination of pedagogy and technology, that we could actually rely on these mechanisms to improve learning outcomes. I guess there are still some questions and considerations. So considerations and lingering questions. The first one is, I think for us, the study also underscores the need to understand and respond better to the needs of learners in emergency settings and are vulnerable. So those affected by typhoons, which is, I guess, tama yung timing natin today, conflict, or in geographically isolated and displaced areas. One of our research is actually to profile our last mile learners. And we're not talking about last mile learners in terms of those who are hard to reach only, but also those who are vulnerable. Who are they? What is the universe of these learners? What is their profile? How are they currently served by the system or failed by the system? And what different supports do they need in order to succeed? And what type of resources does that require? So what we're doing is to try to look at elementary, secondary education and to understand who are our last mile and vulnerable learners here, and what type of packages of interventions do they need in order to really be able to complete education. In terms of our considering other questions, I guess, what could we infer for other lessons or subjects apart from math and other grade levels? So we see that it works for math, especially for addition, multiplication, subtraction, division from grades 3 and 4. But I guess we also are curious to see experiences elsewhere in terms of other key stages or subjects, for example, in English or Filipino, and also generally, how could we enhance resilience of our schools and our students? In terms of education technologies as a whole, we are studying how technologies could be used to transform education delivery and governance. I guess the first one is instruction. How could the different technologies be leveraged? What works better for which key stage or subject? For example, in our conversations in early childhood education, we understand that a lot of parents don't bring their children to daycare centers. Maybe we could use television, which seems to be accessible for most, as a mechanism of sharing resources to parents on how they could educate their children from ages 0 to 2. Or using television as a mechanism to provide additional supports at home, especially for children whose parents or guardians could not provide the support, especially in the conversations on learning recovery. So we know that there is now a learning camp that is going on that is spearheaded by DepEd. There are also discussions, especially through the ARAL bill filed by Senator Win, to provide after-school tutoring for children. But maybe for those when they go at home, how could we use television to provide an extra layer of support for such learners? We're also talking about how it might look like for TVET and for higher education, also the use of AI for research. So these are things that we are studying now in EDCOM and trying to understand how we could strategically use technology to help transform learning and improve the quality of implementation of education services. We're also trying to understand our limitations in terms of resources as well as infrastructure capacity of schools and homes. So what are other tech solutions that could be tried? One, of course, is the problem of procurement, of how procurement takes forever, how procurement really makes it difficult for us to get the right equipment or infrastructure that is required for many of these technologies. And so we need to be creative in our approaches, as demonstrated by IPA. Are there affordable technologies that could be used to support learning of students, those that do not rely necessarily on internet connectivity? And also, how could it be used to share learning resources? Because we also know of examples that when teachers have access to such resources, even if it's not accessible to the students, that they could use those platforms and databases as means of drawing or getting for themselves materials that they could use in their classrooms. So how could we do more of that, and how could government support that? We are also talking about how could we use technology to improve the efficiency of organizations. For example, in terms of collecting data on learners, analyzing where they are and how they are progressing. This is the same issue, no? In basic ed, ECCD, TVET, higher ed, the problem of data and the problem that we are still collecting data manually and still cleaning it up slowly at different levels, from the provincial level, regional level, central level. And then it takes forever because before we're able to respond, it's time to gather the next set of data and the year has lapsed. Figuring out how to use technology to be able to do this more systematically, also so that we don't keep asking for the same questions and reports from all of our schools, and also to unburden our teachers from all of these administrative burdens and submissions that is constantly a complaint of our teachers. So one of our main challenges is improving planning and implementation is the lack or the delays in the availability of data across the board. So having technology as a means for us to be able to gather this more quickly would really help us a lot in this effort. I guess one thing that also struck me in our conversations in that small group meeting that we had recently on technology was this. Someone said that good teachers will use technology effectively, but it could also amplify poor teaching. And so I guess we also need to ask ourselves, how do our teachers feel about technology? What is their openness to it? How are we supporting teachers in terms of building their confidence and proficiency in it? Because technology also isn't the solution on its own without good teachers that know how to use it well, and that it's designed to really address the needs of the learners that they are serving. In the next few weeks, we're going to have our hearing in terms of the measurement of learning outcomes, and our questions would revolve around what assessments are we using to know where our learners are and who has access to these type of assessments, no? Because of course we have the National Achievement Test, but if those results are not accessible to teachers themselves, then how does it inform their instruction? How can they pivot quickly to respond to the needs of their students? What type of assessments or quick and dirty assessments might be available on the ground to enable teachers to quickly pivot or customize how they approach things in a way that better meets the learners where they are? So these are questions that we are asking in our continued meetings, especially in the Standing Committee on Basic Education. So actually, I also checked the PPST and positive use of ICT there. So PPST is the Philippine Professional Standards of Teachers, and positive use of ICT is there from beginning all the way to distinguished teachers. And I guess it's also us ensuring that these type of competencies are reflected and mirrored in the PPST, in our in-service training programs that are run, but also in our teacher ed curriculum in CHED, to make sure that it is a skill or a competency that we are continuously able to build in our teachers, and that we have lifelong learners, teachers themselves, who are agile enough to keep learning new technologies and keep experimenting different types of technologies that are novel, such as the one that was shown to us by IPA. So it's a continuing work, but I think the research is shown by Dr. Babes and also by Noam and Jepoy align with the principles of EDCOM. So in terms of the work that we are doing in the next 3 years, what we are trying to do is actually two things. One is to really diagnose the problems and to understand the context of our students, both in the classroom and also at home, so that we could provide the right interventions that that really conform to their needs. And then the second is also surveying global solutions that work in contexts that are similar to us. Of course, we're looking at Finland, Singapore, all of these high-income countries that have done education well, but we're also looking at other countries such as Vietnam, Indonesia, some countries in Africa, and some countries in Latin America to understand what solutions might be more applicable to the Philippine setting and that we could learn from in order to craft our own solutions and interventions so that we could find, I guess, a faster route in terms of improving learning outcomes. It also highlights to us the importance of monitoring and evaluation. I think it underscores that we do need to invest a lot in understanding what interventions work, because unless we do that, we are unable to continuously refine the programs of government. And hopefully it is something that we will be able to put back into the system, like a feedback mechanism that would allow our agencies, in terms of the programs that they do, to continuously learn and iterate. So I guess also the concept of piloting and iteration, because no program will be perfect from the beginning. And so we need to design it in such a way that we could monitor and evaluate and then improve, so that before we scale it, it is tried and tested. And hopefully we could find local solutions that could be scaled so that it works for more Filipino learners. So yun lamang po for now. Salamat.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, Dr. Yi. We're glad to hear that these studies could be useful and helpful for EDCOM too. And you also raised important points to consider as we think about more how we can effectively and responsibly leverage technology to improve the quality of education, not only for our learners, but also for our teachers. Great. Okay, next we shift things a bit to hear from the perspective of someone who is involved in implementing many education policies and programs, including being involved in the implementation of the mEducation program in the Philippines. So we're pleased to have Dr. Cerilo Illaga Jr., Senior Education Program Specialist of the Planning and Research Section of the Schools Division of Calapan City in MIMAROPA region. He presented several research studies at international, national, regional, and division levels. He is currently conducting 4 studies under the Basic Education Research Agenda to address gaps in key performance indicators of DepEd. He completed a Bachelor of Secondary Education, major in Mathematics, Master of Arts in Education, major in Mathematics, and a PhD in Education Management. Dr. Illaga, over to you.
Thank you so much po, and magandang araw po sa lahat. Good day, everyone. My task is to share my insights and reactions to mEducation program of IPA. Of course, one of the partners of DepEd in research endeavors. Actually, IPA, we notice IPA as because of DepEd memorandum from, of course, Central Office. And after knowing that SDO is one of the respondent SDO, they conducted orientation, a short orientation via online during that time, since it was pandemic. And of course, it was headed by Sir Jepoy, the one who presented the result of mEducation, and Ma'am Isha, our MC for today. And immediately after, they conducted series of orientations in not only in the schools division, but also in 10 selected schools of DepEd Calapan, along with the school heads. And of course, all those research ethical issues, standards, procedures, and protocols were strictly followed by IPA. Admittedly, the schools division was hesitant at first to participate in the research, since the bulk of work has been the main problem of teachers, which was amplified during the pandemic. Yun nga po, we are very hesitant since majority of teachers foresee that this is one of the tasks that they will be handling. But little did we know that mEducation will not only simplify their work, but solve numeracy problems in grades 3 and 4 as well. Teachers find this research fun and worth it. They are hoping that DepEd continues to provide opportunities to teachers to be a part of some innovations like that of IPA to address problems not only in numeracy but also literacy and reading comprehension. This research is very timely as DepEd implements the Matatag agenda, which was mentioned earlier by the presenters, focusing on problems on numeracy and literacy. of learners. And of course, this was mentioned by DepEd Secretary and Vice President of the Philippines, Sara Z. Duterte, in the delivery of Basic Education Report early this year, 2023. Quote unquote, she said, "We need everyone to get involved, work together to bring back the quality education to our learners. Let us welcome innovators, partners, stakeholders." So those are the words that that our Vice President, at the same time, DepEd Secretary, told everyone in the DepEd. Elsewhere, since the group of researchers headed by Sir Jepoy and Ma'am Isha are so accommodating and kind, the SDO experienced no problem at all in conducting this mEducation program. Indeed, through mEducation, in the IPA-led group, since there are different interventions, one of the treatment groups of mEducation, one of the tutors is now permanent teacher in one of the schools here in the SDO. As Sir Jepoy discussed earlier, they asked some volunteers and of course some teachers who are at the RQA or Registry of Qualified Applicants of DepEd for IPA-led IPA tutors as IPA tutors. Having considered the significance of the result of this research, the SDO could submit the research findings of mEducation to DepEd Regional Office, and they can recommend to include the results in future endeavors of Central Office to formulate policies as regards how to address problems in numeracy, especially that we are now conducting the National Learning Camp to address learning loss and gaps. The SDO is not the policy-making body, and the regional office is not as well. So we can only recommend to higher ups to DepEd Central Office for some consideration for their policy for DepEd order or any other issue ones that will come from DepEd Central Office. Of course, in consideration with this kind of research or evidence-based research from the field. And for now, during the in-service training and learning action cells of schools in the SDO, the 10 participating schools are disseminating the results of mEducation in support of the Learning Recovery Plan of DepEd. I myself, as the research coordinator of the schools division, continues to incorporate the research findings in all the discussions about research focusing on learning gaps and recovery of DepEd. We cannot craft policy because we are at the SDO level and even the regional office. All we can do is to elevate this result to central office so that they are the ones to formulate policies regarding numeracy and literacy gaps or losses of DepEd. And on behalf of DepEd, we found this research useful, meaningful, and significant. We commend IPA for the worthwhile endeavor. Thank you so much, and have a good day, everyone. Thank you so much, Sir Jepoy and Ma'am Isha.
Thanks so much, Dr. Illaga, and really thank you for the kind words for that. And I'm so happy to learn that some of our mEducation tutors are now with DepEd. And I'm also glad to hear that through this research, through this collaborative endeavor, you're able to promote evidence-based solutions for the education sector. And it goes to show that by collaborating together with our implementers, such as DepEd, we were able to work together and design, adapt, and implement programs targeting the needs of our learners. We hope we can continue working with your SDO and other SDOs present here who may be interested in the program. And perhaps, we can also work together in designing other potential education programs based on the data that we've seen, so that we can also think about other ways and other interventions that will help our learners and our teachers. Okay, great. So now we've heard from our presenters, from our discussants. Now we've arrived to the Q&A session where we can answer most pressing questions, or perhaps we may have some clarification and we'd like to hear more from our speakers this afternoon. So I guess at this point, perhaps may I ask our speakers and panelists to turn on your video so the audience can see you when you answer the questions. Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so we can start. For the first question, these questions are really general comments on the Philippine education crisis. So first question comes from Ms. Leah from Miriam College for Dr. Orbeta, or perhaps others in the group would like to answer. So the question is, how do we move forward given the students did not learn enough for the last 2 years? So I guess during the time of the pandemic then.
Yeah, I think the only way to just consider the very low proficiency from the PISA scores, and the only way to recover from that is massive tutorial. But I'm not very much fan of that the tutorials should be in school because you're overburdening the teachers. This is emergency. If we have used learning support aids during the pandemic, maybe we should be using the learning support aids for tutorials, massive tutorials on top of the regular school, not depending on DepEd teachers, because that's really I think that's the only way. And I think Noam has mentioned that one that is targeted learning and learning at the levels that where the students are, and targeting low SES students from low SES are very key in terms of trying to recover from that. But in the massive tutorial, we can't escape from that if we want to recover essentially from a very low proficiency, as been shown by the test scores.
Thank you for that, Sir Babes. Just to follow up, so you mentioned about targeted instruction. Perhaps I'll shift this to Noam. So you mentioned in your presentation that for the mEducation program, one of the key components is actually targeted instruction. Could you talk a bit more about why you think this is such an important or such a core component to the program success? And perhaps you have some thoughts about having like learning support aids or perhaps other tutors other than the teachers to deliver this instruction or like remedial education program.
Great points. And actually, I know, Dr. Orbeta, we had a chance to talk about that in more depth recently as well. What would be the way to actually, who would actually do it, right? How would you do it? If I may, on the targeted instruction, I just want to show one slide, which I think helps get that point across. Can you see this? I didn't know you were going to ask that question, Isha, but I'm always ready. So I think, what is the idea behind targeted instruction? So I kind of mentioned this, but I think a visual always helps. So we typically in the education system, we teach to a grade, right? I mean, we have these grades. They're how we do things. You have grade 3, you have grade 4, right? And there's a curriculum, right? And the curriculum is a grade level curriculum. I think the challenge is that in practice, often very few children are at the grade level, right? So the grade level might be in grade 3 and 4 to learn to multiply and divide, but only 10 to 15% of students are at grade level, right? And so as the teacher teaches the grade level curricula, which is one size fits all, 90% of children are not grasping, right? They're not grasping what's going on in the classroom, but the teachers are still asked to teach this curricula. So the idea behind teaching at the right level is instead of doing things by grade, you actually assess the children who can't add, who can't subtract, who can't do any operations. You can do the same thing in literacy, right? Who can't read a word, who can't read a paragraph, who can't read a story, and you teach to their level. So it's kind of reversing this. Instead of teaching horizontally, you teach vertically. You take kids in grades 3 through 5, you have an addition class or a subtraction class. Again, you can do the same thing in literacy. So that's the idea. You know, tutoring also does this in a way, because when you're working with a child one-on-one, you can also teach to their level, especially if it's very customized and very, you know, you're using assessment. That's the idea. It's a simple idea, but as many will appreciate here, it's actually a radical proposition for education system, because we're very rooted in grade level curricula structures. So I'm very curious to hear what this group thinks is a way of actually scaling and institutionalizing it. Easier said than done. But that's the idea behind targeting instruction. I think, again, it builds in these things around assessment and so forth. I think on the learning support or teacher point, of course, you all would know so much better. The thing I would say is, it did work with teachers. So I think it's right that teachers are always overburdened and we have to be careful what we ask teachers to do, but they can do it. I think sometimes we do get into these debates. I think, Dr. You also talked on this. They're not qualified, they can't do it. I think we found in this evidence that they could, right? So the issue wasn't that they couldn't. I think it was what Dr. Orbeta is saying, is that you just have too much going on, right? So if you can give them some room to breathe, they can do it, right? But the question is, how do you give them room to breathe? In the absence of room to breathe, absolutely bring anyone into the system who is willing and able. The more the merrier, right? Learning support aides, volunteers, all hands on deck, right? It is a crisis and people can help and want to help. So I think both of those things can coexist. Give the teachers room to breathe and bring in more hands on deck.
Thanks so much, Noam. Okay, now we have another question. This is from Mario Derquito of BDO Foundation. Can you please comment on the observation that the government's policy to close down all schools was too sweeping, not taking into consideration that there were provinces and islands that were no cases of COVID? So perhaps for this question, we could hear from the government. I'm not sure, Dr. Yi or probably Dr. Illaga will provide more context on this.
Sorry, I actually would pass on that because I was not here during the pandemic. I was in the UK and did not really get to monitor everything that was happening. So I would not want to, make a wrong statement.
No problem. No problem. Perhaps, Dr. Illaga, since you were also on the ground, and I know during that time, I think at the end of 2022, you were working with the schools on finding out which schools were ready to come back to in-person classes. How was that situation? How to shift, given that after from all schools being closed down, now that shifting back to in-person classes?
Actually, when we experience face-to-face, it's not a full implementation. Like we divide the class, and then afterwards, there are shiftings of classes since that is the design of the SDO in the regional and at the regional level. And actually, since SDO is one of the respondent SDO of mEducation, we utilize the phone-based education. So that's what we see how significant that the 10 schools are doing the mEducation or the mobile education. That's one of the reasons why those students under students having difficulty in numeracy, and how I wish mEducation will also apply literacy or the language, not only the numbers. We actually cope up with the in-person classes in general. And we experience a little problem, not only pandemic, but the heat index in the middle of the year. So as we experience, we try to have this contingency plan and shift once again to several classes and do modular or blended approach rather.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Illaga. And I think, you made a good point that even beyond the pandemic, now that schools have returned to full in-person classes, we still are experiencing other forms of school disruption. And hopefully, programs such as mEducation that could be easily rolled out, I would believe is something that is also worth considering to help our learners to ensure continuity of learning despite disruptions. Okay, so since we talked about
I think Isha, I'll add to that. No, I think it's an important statement about the disruptions in classes. Actually, I was talking to Dr. Babes about this because we know that there's, for example, 210 school days, but what actually is instruction time out of the 210 days? Because we know that there are many disruptions. Like just this week alone, how many class days have been lost, and also other disruptions that are not natural, sometimes some man-made. So I guess we need to understand what disruptions there are to instructional time and schooling, or teachers being able to interact with their students, and what are ways by which we could I guess bridge that to make sure that all of those times are not always lost. I think it's critical to quantify that and figure out these creative solutions.
Great. Thanks so much, Rene. So now that we've touched a bit on mEducation, there are some mEducation specific questions. So I guess I can direct this to Jepoy. So the question from Astero Olandria from Davao Oriental State University: how are these the 3,000 students in 130 schools distributed? Were there schools in the GIDA included, the geographic isolated areas?
Okay, thank you, Isha, for that question. So the schools were distributed, or what we did at least during the implementation of mEducation was to reach out to regional offices, and then they recommended SDOs, and the SDOs then recommended school division offices that they would think would benefit the most from the intervention. So there were some geographically isolated schools that were included. And even during the implementation of mEducation, for example, we still had a lot of challenges with phone signals, because even if the requirement is very basic, just a phone call and a phone signal, that we still struggled with. But we found solutions on those concerns by implementing a strict scheduling system and informing the households ahead of time of when we will call, so that they can also prepare. For example, finding a spot where the phone signal is the best, or at least going maybe sometimes outside their homes to just finding a good spot. And that was also a testament to how committed the households were and the students were in terms of learning. So I think in terms of a policy, we also recognize that this won't, for example, solve all the problems of learning, but in some way we will be able to address a segment or a population that can be reached but maybe not learning enough. And through this phone call intervention, we'll be able to reach them.
Thanks, Jepoy. We have a few more questions on practical and important questions on education in terms of implementation. So question refers to who will provide the load for teachers to execute the phone call tutorials. And yeah, basically, because we mentioned that the program was cost effective, but perhaps moving forward, now we're thinking of scale. What do you think will be the mechanisms and ways to help teachers or provide teachers or schools with the necessary resources to actually implement this program at scale?
Ideally, Isha, thank you for that question. Ideally, in the long term, this is something that, for example, the government would be willing to take on, given how effective it is. In the medium term, though, we're still being funded by donors, but we're also exploring at this point partnerships with LGUs. I think that kind of model has worked in different school division offices, where the LGU would provide support, for example, especially in terms of phone loads and all the other related expenses. And maybe Noam can also speak on how it's being done at scale in different countries in your experience.
I mean, one thing I would say is, if there's anyone on this call who wants to try this, let Jepoy and Isha know. I think we're eager to find partners and try things in more places, especially with regional offices, with sub-regions. So please reach out and follow up. Hopefully folks have our contact information. And I think these are the kind of questions that we want to dig into next. Now we know this can work, and the questions are how to keep it as cheap as possible, how to scale it within the system, how to find the right delivery model. And so, yeah, would welcome partnership of folks on this call to take those next steps. I think we know the biggest cost drivers of programs are usually people and transportation, and then food, right? I imagine that's the case. That's the case for almost any program, right? So I think on the people point, it comes back to this point we've been talking about, is who's going to do this? So is it going to be teachers, or is it going to be learning support aides? I saw someone put in the chat More the merrier, but there's a budget implication. That's true, right? So the Department of Education would have to prioritize that. After the who is where. The actually great thing about mEducation, there's almost no transport costs because it's very virtual. So in that sense, it's quite cheap. Trainings can be virtual. So again, the kind of transport food is very low. They have the devices. So really the main cost drivers are very low if you can get the right who. I think that's the key question, who and when. And then this is very scalable. There's still some costs like money for phone, airtime and data, but that's very cheap. That there should be money for. So the big one is who and where. And I think that's what we have to figure out with DepEd. Or
Thanks,
who and when, sorry, who and when.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Noam. Yeah, and actually, we're still we're continuing that conversations with DepEd, and as mentioned, the way we work with our partners is to make sure that there's a collaborative effort, and we welcome insights and suggestions on how to make this program work for our learners. Okay, so we'll shift back to some general comments on the education environment. So for Dr. Orbeta, this is from Maria Bailon, how can the learning gap among poor and marginalized students be addressed, and which other agencies of government can DepEd work with for additional support? Or perhaps others can also answer this after Dr. Orbeta.
Yeah, I think there's no going around targeted instruction. And you already see if you familiar with test scores, the poor always perform lower on average. So, and already the reasons, and one of the reasons being that they have poor home support besides not having devices. So those are the two things that, what we are able to measure is just the education qualification of the parents or the guardians in this. We are not able to measure the study conditions, studying environment in the home, which would likely be poorer as well. That's why I always, one of the things I've been always saying that you have a very low average proficiency. And that very low average is not because all of us are low. We have very bright students who actually compete globally, but there are very few of them. Large number are not proficient students, and these are basically from. So raising their performance, targeting and knowing that is one good way of raising the average, I think, because 80% of our students are not proficient at the level that they are in. Essentially, that's what the tests are saying. So those are basically, most of them are from the post targeted. Besides targeted instruction, is targeted by socioeconomic class is really the key here, and to improve our average scores. That's, I think there's no way going about that, and we cannot rely on home support. So maybe we should have like community support at level, aggregate students so that it will be much more efficient, and intervene there for students who are coming from. The other one thing that can be a very good avenue is the 4Ps program, which identifies students from poor households. That could be an existing avenue for very effective intervention for low SES students.
Sarah, so I'm hearing really targeted instruction as one of the a key component, or perhaps key intervention or mechanism, and how to really help reach where our students are and actually provide them with the needs to support learning. So in relation to that, so I know targeted instruction, one of the important ways to actually do this is on assessment, to really understand where the students actually are in terms of their learning level. So there's another question related to that. So this from Natasha Gray. So the World Bank's learning poverty statistic claims that 90% of children in the Philippines struggle to read or comprehend basic text. So for the group, I guess anyone who would like to answer this, would you agree with the statistic or assessment, or might it be missing some nuance that we should be aware or to take into account?
I think Noam was part of the group that computed that from the World Bank. But let me just, it's a model-based, just quick, it's a model-based estimate. So there will be estimation errors, but it may not be far from the truth given the corroborating results from PISA, TIMSS, and CPLM. And anecdotal evidence. You have a lot of people saying grade 10 years old who cannot read, essentially. That's you always see that in the news, actually. That's it. So it might not be that high because it's a model-based estimate, but it might not be also far from the truth. Because as I've said, we already explained that there is a the problem with remedial is that the remedial is put on the shoulders of the teacher who are not passing the students. So why are you my always answer is, why are you making your life difficult by not passing the students? You just pass on the problem to the next grade, essentially. That's how these things happen, essentially. So I think one of our studies that the one of the indicators for the incentives for teachers is low dropout rates. So you will not get that incentive if you have a high dropout rate. So the dice are loaded against not passing the students. So that's all of these stories is trying to is corroborating that, but maybe that's too high, but I think it's not too far from the truth.
Thanks, sir. If anyone from the group would like to add, or yes, sir. Yes.
Actually, the problem of DepEd, especially classroom teachers, the main problem is that they are handling ancillary tasks or administrative tasks. And DepEd, central office, provided items for AO or administrative officers, but not 100% have their one-on-one ratio AO and schools. But in the meantime, we are having 1:3 AOs, and that is a good sign that DepEd is doing something in line with the matatag agenda of DepEd, which for the G gives support to teachers to teach better. Because the main problem is teachers are supposedly teaching in the classroom, but in reality, some of their time were consumed by doing a lot of administrative tasks.
Right. Well, and related to that, just a follow-up, perhaps, Dr. you could provide some comment on this and how can we really help support teachers? I know, yeah, there's a lot of tasks assigned to them, but really the main point of the role of teachers is to really teach the students. So how will they balance this work given to them?
Right. I think the first step is really to understand what barriers there are that teachers face to being in the class and being present in teaching their students. We've been doing our consultations with teachers. So what we're doing differently with EDCOM is that we're actually sitting down with teachers and then later on with students, with parents, to really understand where they are instead of just always having meetings here in the Senate. And we've learned a lot. Initially, we thought it was typhoons that was causing the problem of low instructional time or disruptions in schooling. But actually, as mentioned by Cerilo, it's really also admin burdens, reports being required by different offices that they need to work on, project proposals, concept notes that they're asked to do. And so sabi nga ng ibang teachers, even if they're in the classroom, they can't teach their students because they have to type a concept note and then they'll ask their students to just do an activity. We need to quantify what number of the 210 days is actually left for the teacher to be with the learner and to actually teach. And we also have to understand the constraints of teachers in different contexts because not all are single shift schools. There are multi-shift schools and there are so many responsibilities. So when we're talking about admin burdens, it's not just about a teacher doing the job of a librarian, doing a job of a guidance counselor or a counselor to a student. It's not just going to attend mga province-wide or municipality-wide activities, alay lakads, pa-contest, ati-atihan. It's really also these day-to-day burdens that are passed on to teachers that prevent them from actually teaching. I've also heard from two conferences that I joined recently that there are many agencies that depend on teachers for support services such as DSWD for P4Ps, DOH for deworming and vaccination. So all of these things, if they don't have boots on the ground, they ask teachers to be the ones to do. And all of this erode the time of instruction between the teacher and the student. So the first step is really understanding what are all of these added work and what does it take away from, and then from there find a solution. Because as I said, we're talking about revising the K to 10 in order to be decongested. But if we're revising K to 10 to fit 210 days of instructional time, it's still congested, because if the remaining days is actually 160, maybe we should design to that. So we're studying all of these things, quantifying the actual days of instruction, how to protect those days, constraints of teachers, and how to make sure that teachers are free to actually teach their students during these times. We're also looking at flexibility in terms of what they teach and how they teach, because the principles of TARL really is relying on the teacher being able to assess the student and being able to teach the student as to where they are. We realize, and we've been learning from teachers, that in terms of practices, they are sort of constrained from doing that because of the need to stick to daily lesson logs and to weekly plans that disable them from really going back to lessons, and they need to jump to another without really ensuring that that learning has happened for that specific lesson. And so we're studying how real that is as a problem, because we've been hearing it from the ground, but really understanding what practices are in the classrooms that we really need to address. And hopefully all of that could really give the teachers the agency and the time, the capacity, the space to actually teach well. So pinag-aaralan pa natin, but hopefully we'll get to the right solutions.
Right, that's great to hear about, Dr. Yi. And really, the teaching load is something that was also one of the key considerations when we approached DepEd and asked whether we can run the mEducation program, knowing that the teachers are also burdened with other tasks. So in relation to that, I'll ask Jepoy about in terms of like the experience with mEducation and how we were able to find a balance and making sure the teachers are able to work with us on this implementation of the program. So there's actually one specific question. So for a teacher handling, for say, 3 sections with 30 to 40 students, she's asking how long will it take for the teachers to finish the phone call tutorials?
Yeah, so Isha, for in terms of balancing, for example, the administrative burdens, the teaching burdens in mEducation, when we were implementing it, we made sure that the teachers only had 3 to 4 students per week, so only around 2 hours per week to spend on mEducation. And we feel that the gains that can be, or that were gained during the implementation would far outweigh the burden of additional 2 hours per week for the students. And in terms of a class with, for example, 30 to 40 students, we don't envision it at this point to be catered to all students. For example, there can be a mechanism in which the rollout will be gradual. For example, first targeting students who really need it, or maybe targeting students right after a typhoon or a school disruption, but not, for example, addressing or committing all the students in a class to this intervention at a certain point. So yeah.
All right, thanks, Jepoy. And this next question is addressed to Noam from Rene Raya, asking what can explain the good results from Uganda? So have you tried controlling for country income level, country SDG 4 rating, family, socioeconomic status, parents' background, location, and so on?
And so the 2 strongest results that we've seen for this approach are in the Philippines and Uganda. If you'll remember this graph, actually, we think this is part of the explanation. If you can see this again. So recall I was saying here in the Philippines, about 65% of the time the instruction was targeted. What you could see in Uganda on the right is it was targeted 81% of the time. So we think that's what's driving it, right? It really is about getting the instruction targeted as much as possible. So we think that's one. The other is Uganda and the Philippines have the longest school closures in the world. And so that's where there was most need. So those are the two things where we think, which we think explain that. So yeah, that's the key. Target the instruction. Again, easier said than done. You need a few things for that, right? You need frequent assessment. I think I'm hearing that might become, maybe that's a priority of EDCOM, if I've understood, which I think would be really a game changer, to have frequent kind of classroom, school-based assessment that are used to inform instruction, right? Not just once every 4 years for kind of high-level accountability, but used for day-to-day instruction. I have to say, I really do think that is one of the single most important things that can be done. It enables effective targeted instruction, but it also enables people to see results. And I feel like so many teachers and people in the education system want to just see results, right? I mean, it's you come in, day out, and you're not sure if the children are learning. You're not measuring if the children are learning. You're not seeing if the children are learning. It's very depressing, when you actually see the children learning and they're happy and everyone sees that they're learning. It's really fuel for the system, the education system. So I think we've talked about mEducation in our study, but one of the things that we did there is just have really frequent assessment that was used for instruction and for measuring progress. That principle, I think, is very broad, actually. It's not just for mEducation. It could apply to anything. And I'm thrilled to hear that there's interest in that. Getting that assessment right is really important. Okay? I think having it be simple and cheap and quick and accessible. I think sometimes when we design these assessments, they're very complicated and expensive and technocratic. So I think the devil is in the details. I think getting those assessments to be simple, accessible, cheap, 1 page, no more, no less, maybe just 5 questions, no more, no less. Then I think you can start to create some fuel for the education system and a sense of progress.
Thanks for that, Noam. Speaking about the concept of assessment, perhaps I can direct this again to Jepoy. So there's a question on the implementation. So can you explain the concept of how the assessment for mEducation was done, and how did we control for cheating activities? Since we mentioned that the student will be with the parent or the caregiver during the call, how did we make sure that that did not disrupt the learning between teacher and the student?
Okay, so I think this is a very important point, and this would also speak to the strength of the program, because as we said at the beginning, we would conduct this quick assessment to determine the level of the child. So the way it works is the child or the participating student would be asked consecutive questions on basic foundational math problems. So we will start with addition and then move on to subtraction, multiplication, division. The important key here, though, is that if a student is not able to answer the subtraction question, for example, we will no longer ask the multiplication question and the division question. It assumes that these skills build up. And so, for example, if the student ends up only answering subtraction, then that's the instruction that we will give the student for the first week. And on mechanisms to ensure that we're really testing the skill of the student, we have several mechanisms for that. One, we make sure that, for example, during the assessment, the student is on speaker so that there won't be any coaching that's happening, and so that the student can really demonstrate that he or she knows how to answer the question. And we also remind the parents constantly, especially during the assessment, not to interrupt or not to coach during the instruction. And I think third, we made sure that the teachers also have been properly trained to determine, for example, whether the student really is able to answer questions, and to, for example, ensure that the parents are not coaching or not using a calculator during the assessment.
Thanks, Jepoy. So I'll also ask this question with first for Sir Cerilo. So given that you are an education specialist and I know your background is on math, could you share your thoughts on this type of assessment that we did for mEducation, how Jepoy explained how we did that with our students?
Okay po. Actually, during the first orientation, way back 2021, I together with our SDS, who is also a math major, we tried to compare the questions against the MELCs or the competency of DepEd, and of course they aligned it, and we validated it, and it passed our validation. So maganda po, maganda. Actually, we found it very significant and meaningful yung sa study, and of course we are planning to recommend this after the National Learning Camp. So parang follow up, since our National Learning Camp really wants to address learning gaps, learning loss, and of course itong ganitong modality, it can be used as follow up, especially this mEducation program. So yun po, thanks po.
Thank you, sir. That's great to hear. And yeah, we're very much willing to work again with you on how to adapt this program for the National Learning Camp of DepEd. So yeah, touching a bit on the content. So you mentioned that we had to, or we were able to match the exercises or the curriculum with the MELCs of DepEd. So there's a question specifically on that. So I guess again, Jeff, sorry, I'll give this question to you. So from Mario Derriquito, so what type of content did we use for mEducation? So yeah, can you speak more about how we developed the math content for this?
So for the math content, with the team of Youth Impact, we already have like a set of questions to be asked and to be instructed during the phone call tutorials. What we did though was to make sure that these questions are aligned with the MELCs, and we consulted with the Curriculum and Instruction Division of DepEd to validate our content. And as mentioned by Sir Cerilo, we had several consultations, not just with the central office, but also with the teachers that were part of our delivery, so that we made to make sure that these are what grade 3 and grade 4 students actually should learn at their level.
Thanks so much, Chapoy. And then this next question is more on the scaling concern of this program. So perhaps anyone from the group would like to answer this. So this question is from Mariel Joy Sampang. The pilot programs are rarely scaled up to national levels, and when they are, they do not show the same level of impact and effectiveness. So scaling up interventions lead to a set of problems which can lead to dilution of quality implementation, weakening the very promising effects found in the pilot studies. So what could be the implementation adaptations to scale to ensure quality and equity, let's say for this mEducation program? Yes, I don't know, or Dr. Orbeta would like to answer that question on how to scale up, effectively scaling up programs that were found to be effective during the pilot.
Yeah, I'm happy. Yeah, after Dr. Orbeta and others, I'd love to hear from others.
I think the initial implementation should give you issues about the feelings of some. There would be, I would suppose. It's not, and that's usually the way you would look at the pilot is always to find which one works in which situation and what causes the problems, the fidelity of implementation, basically checking on the fidelity of the implementation and why those things happen. And that's so the pilot is the first implementation is covering varied situations. Should be able to capture that the sources of variation implementation. It's always a variation implementation that is the main source of lack of at scale. So that should be where you get your ideas on how to maintain implementation fidelity at scale, and I would suppose that's so strong monitoring of those issues will be important. for any program that will be implemented at scale.
Isha, I think I'll let Noam answer first, and then I have a different perspective. I mean, not totally related to this, but in general, after Noam.
From both of you, so I'm in the hot seat. You know, I would be intrigued what the group thinks. Everyone actually. You know, it is a challenge. Scaling is hard. You know, I think that's right. I mean, often things do work at small scale and they don't work at large scale. I think we actually don't pay enough attention to that issue. Sometimes we focus on the small studies. You know, what encourages me with this work is this is an approach that's worked in 5 countries with tens of thousands of children. It's worked with governments. So I think there's some hope, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. And that we won't have to keep an eye on it and measure very carefully. I think this is where thinking really carefully about how to work within government systems, but also with partners to complement government systems is really important. And so, you know, maybe it's a cop-out, but what I will say is I have faith and I'm hoping we can work together to do it. But I do think we'll need to study it. I don't think we can take just a leap of faith, right? I think sometimes people say, oh, it's scaling. No, I think we need to pay close attention. I think we need to measure, we need to monitor, we need to study, we need to put in effort and make it happen. One thing I will say, and I imagine this is probably quite true in the Philippines, which is, you know, so big and has so many, it has some decentralization, right? I've worked in smaller countries where even there it's very decentralized. And I think sometimes we only work at one level. And I think we've seen, in at least in other places, the importance of working at all levels and the importance of not just going top down, but also bottom up, actually. And so I'm curious to see how that evolves in this partnership, but we've seen that be really important. So not just getting stuck at, you know, HQ, but working with HQ and the regions and the LGUs and the schools and really getting contact and traction and measurement at all levels. So it's work, but that's what it takes to scale important things and good things.
I think so that connects very well with the point I wanted to make. So one approach is perfecting the pilots and then figuring out how to scale it. The other is localizing solutions, giving them the space and the capacity to figure out solutions given the community of learners that they're dealing with, because it's very different to scale for millions of Filipino learners anyway at the national level. And so maybe, and even if you could test different pilots, you know, its applicability to different contexts would really be difficult to achieve. And so I think the other way could also be giving local agents of change, the principals, the teachers, the space to actually find out where they are, the importance of assessment, and then giving them the space to experiment, to iterate, to localize solutions that work for them. And then, as Noam said, then bottom up. So a lot of teacher training efforts, we realize that it's really pollinating bees instead of just one important, massive rollout of teacher development or in-service programs. It's really relying on pockets of successes and having that happen at scale as a means of really resolving some of these issues. So there aren't always shortcuts to it, but maybe giving space to local champions to actually be able to do it and to try something could work. And maybe that's something that we could do. And decentralization is really one area that we're really studying in EDCOM in a standing committee of governance and finance, and to what extent and for what aspects of education should be decentralized. Is it curriculum and instruction? Is it school building? Is it hiring and appointment of teachers, which already is? Or is it planning and budgeting? So all of these things we're studying as to what might impact learning outcomes.
Thank you so much for sharing those insights. I think those are very important points, and we'll take that into consideration now that, you know, we're still continuing to discuss with DepEd and other education stakeholders who might be interested in this program and other education programs to help improve learning outcomes in the country. And I think right now, that's why we're doing this event, like not to share the evidence, but also spark some discussions and think about how what are the ways to help move forward, bring this forward, and not just simply doing this as a research exercise. Because again, we want to make sure that the policies and programs that we have are evidence-based, so that we'll be able to help the education improve the education sector in the country. Okay, great. So I know we have a lot more questions from the audience, but because of time, I'll probably ask just one more question, and then perhaps for the other questions specifically addressed for speakers, please feel free to answer them on the chat, or perhaps you can also reach out to them after this webinar. So perhaps I can direct this question to Sir Cerilo and to Japoy. So what can we do to encourage more innovations like mEducation to help solve the education challenges in the country? Who would like to start, Japoy?
I can only speak from an outsider's perspective because I haven't really worked internally, or I'm not really from DepEd. But I think from an outsider's perspective, we should always be on the lookout for innovations like this one. This came to IPA at the right time. And then work really hard, find champions, find other people who can help us in reaching more schools and more learners. From implementation itself, what I've learned personally is that we really can't do this alone. So if you find other people with similar goals, if there's a way to formalize a partnership, let's do that. But at the ground level, maybe we should really find other people who are as interested and as committed to this type of innovations, and then collaborate with them, no matter how difficult it can be, because it can be difficult. But yeah, then work together with all the stakeholders that are available and committed.
Misha? Actually, in DepEd, we have several brilliant minds, like what I'm looking at here from FTAD, from Region 4 Mimaropa. Shout out Sir Wendell and Ma'am Ann. From regional this is a regional memorandum, and they are asking for innovations from the field and all the SDOs within Mimaropa, and they have this project Butika, or the archiving of all the innovations and best practices of schools and schools division for future use. Since if there is a bank of innovations and best practices, we can at least benchmark for this kind of PPAs. And as regards the mEducation, I asked this before, can we level this up, meaning not only focusing on numeracy but literacy as well? Ako na yung nagtanong, Sir Sir Jepoy. Kasi it's effective in terms of numeracy, grades 3 and 4 with the basic operations. How about for those with learning gaps when it comes to literacy or reading comprehension? So yun po yung isang gusto rin, because I had the chance to interview one of the teachers that handles mEducation program. So sabi nila, how I wish pati reading na sama na dito sa mEducation. So yun po.
Okay, thanks for that, Sir Cerilo. I think definitely we will discuss that internally. Or also, yeah, that's actually one of the things that that was also brought up in some of our discussions, whether we can also include other subjects for this kind of intervention or learning delivery program. Ayan. Okay, so before we officially close the Q&A session, thank you so much for our speakers and presenters for answering the questions. So perhaps we can ask them to provide just a short closing message from each one of you. Yeah, so perhaps we can start with Dr. Babes. Short message.
Thank you, Isha. I think as I've always been, Marcus maybe has heard me talk about this end times. So basically, we need solutions to our many education problems, and we need to build the capacity to validate solutions rigorously. because this country needs validated solutions for our education, coming from everywhere. So we should be open to all of that.
Thanks, Sir Babes. How about Noam?
One other thing that encourages me in all of this process is that this coalition and partnership has persisted through some transitions. And I often see that as a sign of resilience and sustainability. We know there's been some changes, in government, in leadership, and in various organizations. And the fact that the program keeps going, I think means that there's something really special here, actually, because sometimes when a transition happens, the effort kind of collapses. But it hasn't, it keeps going. So that tells me there's something quite unusual here. And, it does take 10 years to do something transformative. So I hope we all stick with it. I hope everyone is committed for the next 10 years. And, I think the coalition will only get bigger and stronger. And again, even though we've done so much in the last, it's kind of amazing, 3 to 4 years, I think we're just getting started, actually. So I'm so excited for the future ahead. And I hope following this call, the coalition gets stronger. I hope people reach out who want to participate and lead. And, hopefully we can share our contacts and keep growing the coalition and the effort. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Noam. How about Jepoy? And perhaps Jepoy, you can also share how they can reach us for those that are interested in this program.
Oh yeah. So yeah, first I want to just thank PIDS for the platform for sharing mEducation. And as I've mentioned a while ago, mEducation is just one program. It won't solve all the problems in the education sector, but definitely it's probably one of the solutions out there that would provide immediate gains in learning outcomes. And of course, we always want like a systemic solution, but sometimes the solutions that improve outcomes at the margin also are significant and very important. And in terms of partnerships, you can always reach out to us. We will send an email after this webinar to all those who've attended with our contact details. So if you're very open to partnerships, would like to learn more about mEducation, you can definitely contact us, and we can set up a meeting for you for the other million questions that you have here. Testament to how engaged everyone is. So yeah.
Thanks, Jepoy. Dr. Yi?
Thank you, Isha. I think 2 points that I wanted to make. One is education policy research. Dr. Babes knows this. We're working on 100 studies on different education issues that cover the 28 priorities. One difficulty is finding the researchers to do the researches, and we really need to expand our pool of scholars working on education policy issues so that we could test solutions and we could measure success so that we could scale them. Without this, it would be hard to really progress because we're not building things up. We're just scratching and building something new and then dismantling and then building something new again. We need to keep building up so our learners could go up the different ladders of education. So we need to nurture a generation of education scholars to help us do this work. So those who aren't yet or those who are doing graduate studies, please consider focusing on education and help us and contribute to the diagnosing that we are trying to do in the next 3 years. My second point is that EDCOM is only here for the 3 years, no? So it's really a rare window of opportunity for us to work on systems level education reforms. We're trying to make our processes as inclusive as possible. So we have our hearings here in the Senate and in the House. We go to the ground, do consultations, do FGDs with different stakeholders, but we've also launched green papers, and I'm sharing the website link to everyone. So for the 12 priorities of EDCOM 2 for this year, we have written green papers and have asked questions that explicitly relate to the questions we still have that are lingering in terms of the policies that we want to formulate. It also expresses the direction of the Commission in terms of what we are considering as possible solutions. So if you want to get an insight as to what our assessment of the problems are, what are possible directions, and what are still questions we are looking for answers for, whether you're a teacher, a student, a parent, a stakeholder, a researcher, a fellow, please go to this link. Please answer our green papers, submit to us, and we will make sure it is included and synthesized as we try to formulate solutions to it. We're trying to really engage as many stakeholders as possible because we know that, as Father Nebra said in our consultation with teachers, learning does not happen at the central office. It happens in the classroom. And so we want to hear from the teachers, hear from the students, hear from the parents, because that's where the learning happens. So please tell us what could work. Please tell us your experience and please suggest solutions to us. So sana magtulungan po tayo in the next 3 years for the work of EDCOM so we could really improve learning for our students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. Dr. Illaga?
Thanks po, Ma'am Isha. This is for our teachers who are participants. Huwag po kayong mag-alala, aalwan din ang buhay. So yan po ang sinasabi ng ating DepEd Secretary, Sara Duterte, nung siya po ay nag-release ng matatag agenda, especially the G, give support to teachers to teach better. So one of the reasons why we have additional AOs para sila na magtrabaho nitong ating ibang mga tinatrabaho, and we are still hoping for additional employees. Ito po ay nakaplan, huwag po kayong mag-alala, very supportive po ang ating DepEd. And of course, through this mEducation, we can recommend for our policy implementers, the central office, to at least consider this as a follow-up of our national learning camp, especially those struggling learners, and hoping na not only for numeracy. So ayan po. And of course, I want to take the opportunity to give thanks to our PPRD, pioneering the evidence-based proposals, so Ma'am Glo and company, and of course Aftab, as I mentioned, they are conducting this another endeavor, itong amin pong innovations archival for future utilization of teachers. So yan po, magaganda po yan na innovation ng MIMAROPA. And finally, thank you so much for the opportunity mEducation for being a part of mEducation program through, of course, Sir Jepoy and Ma'am Isha. Maraming salamat po.
Ayan. Thank you so much, Dr. Illaga. And thank you so much to our speakers. We really appreciate you lending a few hours of your busy schedules today to share your thoughts and insights on this topic. And I hope our discussion today helped spark ideas on how to address the learning challenges in basic education. And so can we give a round of virtual applause to our speakers for today? Okay, to officially close this event, I would like to call on Aftab Opel, our country director of Philippines and Bangladesh. So Aftab has nearly 3 decades of experience in development and has worked on implementing and evaluating programs on socioeconomic development across Asia. Previously, he served as first country director of the Vision Spring Bangladesh, focusing on market-based solutions for clear vision among those living below the poverty line. As head of programs at WaterAid Bangladesh and sector leader of SMB in Laos, he oversaw various water, sanitation, hygiene behavior change interventions, and capacity building programs. Additionally, he has published numerous articles on poverty and migration. Aftab, over to you.
Thank you so much, Isha, for this introduction. And thank you so much, everybody, the panelists, the presenters, discussion. It was such a lively thing that we observed for the last 2.5 hours. It's really fascinating. And then all the questions also resonate how lively and how useful it was. And thanks, Isha, for such a nice facilitation. We learned about the challenges from different speakers, particularly from Dr. Orbeta's presentation. And then Noam has shown us how a simple technology, mobile phone, the features phone are not even a technology now, they are considered, right? So such a cheap thing can transform and then help the slow learners, the low learners, so achieve the learning gains to come to the level of the peers. So it's such a fascinating, and cost effectiveness, it's just $12, right, per student or per child. So it's probably the lowest intervention in the education system, right? So there are challenges, but you cannot find just one solution. So we need to working on these aspects. And then Mr. Illaga was saying that it's not just numeracy. There are so many other learning deficiencies that we should look into, right? So I think this continuous collaboration is so needed. And this collaboration is not just among the researchers, it's among the policymakers and then the practitioners and then the researchers. So if you can bring everybody together, I think we can find the best solution. And this is something continuous, right? We cannot just have something and then keep implementing it. We need to improve it, right? We need to adjust it with the pressing needs, and then the countries have different challenges. For example, for Philippines, with so much natural calamities and disasters, one just happening now, we have to evacuate one of our research team from somewhere in Philippines. So these things are keep happening, right? And we need to adjust ourselves. We need to. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's mainly to improve the same wheel. Probably, right? So I really thank all the presenters, all those who asked questions that lead to such a lively discussion towards the end, and PIDS, IPA to host this important webinar. And it's great to see that we still have about 300 participants joining in this conversation. I hope it was such helpful thing, and we hope to continue to host such interventions so that we can bring everybody together, find solution that works, right, and then we can collaborate. We can have joint initiatives to bring a lasting change among the students and in the education sector. So thank you once again for your contribution and for joining in this intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aftab. A fitting ending message to this very productive afternoon. Rene with so many insights to help us move forward and think ways of how to work together in addressing the many challenges in our education sector. So before we end the webinar, I think we will flash. Okay, so the presentations from the webinar are available at PIDS and SERP website. So you may find the links on the screen. So all the presentations presented earlier will be there. And then we also would like to welcome your feedback on this webinar. We really appreciate getting more thoughts on how to improve succeeding webinars. So please feel free to answer the feedback form. The link is also shown on the screen. Great. Right. I think before that, we also have winners from our raffle. Reaching out to the winners. So winners from Facebook is Ms. Marisa Bagunas of Schola Nazaria Inc. And then from Zoom, we have Ms. Siti Halila Abdullah of the Department of Education and Ms. Cristia Ley Reyes from the Batangas State University. So please, we'll be reaching out to you on how to send out the prizes for that. Okay. Right. So again, thank you so much for attending this webinar. This has been co-hosted by PIDS and IPA, and please don't feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns regarding the presentation, perhaps other potential collaboration, or you want to discuss more with us. So yeah, again, so this before we end, yeah, the next month, PIDS will be hosting another webinar in August. So this is on fostering innovation for growth, insights from the 2021 PIDS Survey of Innovation Activities. So for those who will be interested, please feel free to register for the next webinar. We hope to see you there. Okay. Again, so this concludes our public webinar on transforming education in the Philippines, insights and innovations. Thank you so much, PIDS, for inviting IPA to be your co-hosts, and to our colleagues from Youth Impact and other guests who are joining also from different time zones. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And thank you to our partners from government, academe, CSOs, NGOs, media, private sector for joining of this webinar. And to all the participants in Zoom and Facebook, maraming salamat po. So may we continue working together in promoting evidence-based solutions to build a more equitable, resilient, and responsive education system for our learners. Muli, maraming salamat sa ating lahat. Magandang hapon and please stay safe in this rainy day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.